Good evening and welcome to the Gin and Tonic Show on this Friday, the 12th of April. It's great to be back. I've missed it a couple of weeks. And of course, joined by my co-hosts, Thunderous and Stop Spamming. Good evening, guys. How are you keeping this day?
Fine, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Stops, and good evening, Rob.
Hello, world.
Yes, well, today we're going to do something different. We've had a few requests. Obviously, we're reading the Qur'an and we will continue with that again next week. But we thought we'd do a bit of a change, and we have a video critique that we'll get into in a few moments with Shamsi, who's a Sunni Muslim from Speaker's Corner, and Pavlov, who's, I think, an atheist or an agnostic fellow from Speaker's Corner. So we're going to go through the video, listen to some of the claims made, and make some comments on this. This may be a shorter show than usual. We don't know at this stage. I don't have crazy comments for you at the moment. So if you have any comments, please let us know, obviously. And if you are somebody, particularly if you are a Muslim and you want to join us to give us your view, because what part of what Shamsi will be talking about is slavery, or his understanding about it from an Islamic or Muslim point of view. So we're going to look into that. We might throw up a few references here, etc. as well.
Oh shit, it started. Sorry.
It's okay.
Shamsi was so desperate to get on.
I'm going to now set your screen as the main screen. So this will stay on screen now. And this, even when we talk, we'll see the video instead of us, because we want people to keep an eye on the video. So hopefully this will play. Stops will hear it. We had a few issues, but hopefully that is sorted out. So myself or Thunderous or Stops will stop the video. We'll do, we'll have some words to say as we go along. As I say, the video is not particularly long. It's something like 15 minutes. But you never know. Between the three of us having a conversation, it could take 2 hours. It could take an hour. We don't know at the moment. And there we, of course, have our first Muslim fellow. Let's put it that way in the chats there. Facts are irrefutable. Well, obviously, with Islam, you need to demonstrate some facts. It's all very well saying facts are irrefutable.
Servitude.
But you do need to show it. But by all means, as you listen to the video, if you're a Muslim and you don't want to come on and comment in favor of what you're hearing, then post something in the chat, and as we see it, we'll respond to it. Good. Anything you guys want to say before we get started?
Well, I'd like to say that I want to make something very, very, very clear, and that is slavery. Slavery is if you are involuntarily deprived of all your rights and need to do things that you don't want, but you will do them because you are forced to do so. That is slavery. It originates by people going to a different country, maybe even a different continent, destroying a tribe, destroying the village, destroying all the men, keeping the women, bringing them back to your country, raping them a couple of times on the way, and then keeping some for yourself and selling the others as products, as objects on a market. And then these people go and use these people for whatever they want. And yes, some are just handmaidens, some are just there to fold your clothing, but others are there just for sexual pleasure of their masters. Okay, so I want to make this very, very clear. There is no such way that you can go and say, well, we don't have slavery. This is just a sign in the window, slaves wanted, apply within, and then the people come running to you because they want to have the income from that. That is not slavery. I'm talking about the slavery in the Quran. I'm talking about the slavery in the Hadith. I'm talking about the slavery in the Sunnah in general, where people are forced to do something. The Quran does not say that the people who are the people of the right, the right hand possessors, are not there to have any kind of decision, have any kind of say in the matter. They are being taken as slaves. They do not have any rights. They cannot refuse. And that is something we need to understand before people say, there are no slaves, it's just servitude or something. That's stupid. Okay.
With that said, Thunderous, you want to add anything, or are we good to go?
I think it's quite typical that those who are trying to water down and dilute the interpretations of what words mean, and it becomes an argument of words rather than the system that was put in place by Islam. You know, we're looking at the word. You know, it's not slavery; it's servitude. Really, is that how it's become in this day and age, where we have to try and gloss over or dilute or misdirect or smoke and mirrors the reality of what Islam is and what the Quran teaches and what the words of Muhammad are in the Hadith? That we have to have this conversation, say, when it's quite black and white. And just before we went on, Subs and stuff was saying that it is Islam that it is the Quran and the Hadith that define Islam, not Muslims, and that's what we're going to be discussing this evening.
Indeed. So with that said, Stops, shall we go ahead? And then as we go through, one of us can shout loudly, or you stop it when you want to, but otherwise we'll jump in.
Okay, the way that it works is if one of you here, Thunder or Rob, you want to say something, you just say, whoa, stop, or something like this, and I will stop the video. If somebody in the chat wants to add question or whatever, something, just type a 1. If I see a 1, I will stop the video. Is that a deal? I think that's easy enough, right?
Okay. Makes sense.
Cool, that sounds good. Okay, we're not hearing anything at the moment, Stops. No audio is coming out, Stops, for us.
No audio, because I'm hearing it now.
Yeah, we're not hearing it. I'm not hearing it. I don't know, Thunderous, if you're hearing it.
I'm not hearing it.
No, not for us, Stops.
Oh, goodness. Now?
No.
No, nothing at the moment.
Oh, please. What the hell is going on? Okay, what happens if I change this to here, save? Can you still hear me?
Yep, still hear you.
Okay, that's positive. Let's hear this.
There we go. We can hear that. Can you hear it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, can Stops hear it?
Alhamdulillah.
All right, just rewind it there, Stops. We don't want to miss anything.
I just did. And I did not pray this time.
Okay, well, maybe that helps in this particular case.
You owe it to your fans. Make a video, Mohammed Hijab versus Edward Tabash. Who is Edward Tabash?
Oh, Hijab did a debate with an atheist called Eddie Tabash. I watched the one that was posted on Hijab's channel, but it stopped after sort of opening statements and not cross-examination, but responses to the opening statement. And then they took a break, and I haven't seen the second part, which is them speaking to each other and probably answering questions from the audience. So,
okay. Well, I'm doing the video at the moment with Hijab against this guy here, Pavlov. And I was doing this last night until Rob pulled me away to go and sort out some questions. So,
my fault. There we go. It'll take longer.
Well, it's much easier than to say, oh, yes, as I had such fun.
Right, away we go. Let's hear what...
he's now posted part 2. Okay, remember now, the guy in the middle is the Muslim. This is Shamsi, and the guy on the right is the, I don't know, is the atheist? I think he's...
Atheist agnostic, I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either. But he's Pavlov. From his accent, he's Russian or Ukrainian or something like this, and he's been there a couple.
Shamsi, and this is Pavlov, yeah.
Okay?
Go for it.
Wisdom behind it, and one of them is what? When you take them, you make sure you teach about Islam, you take care of them, and you look after them without any doubt. So he is trying to, I don't disagree with you about some Muslims that do something evil, but what I disagree with James, that he tried to mix and overflop a slavery European one with the Islamic one. Understand? It's not the same at all. It's not. In Islam, Prophet Muhammad said, what's the big difference? I'll tell you what's the difference. European slavery, they used to go enslave 3 people. Used to go enslave them. And no, I'm not talking about Islam now. Arabs.
Yeah, I'm talking about Arabs.
No. I'm not a different.
Okay, I need to step in here because what Shamsi is doing is trying to differentiate between Islam, and we're talking about Islam in the 1st century, okay, AH, in the first Islamic century, it was Arabs. Okay, you can't deny this. What he's trying to do, he says, yeah, but today the most Muslims are in Indonesia, and therefore you can't say it was Arabs. No, we're talking about a time of like over 1,000 years ago when it was only Arabs. Okay, so we need to make.
But he's also, but also, he's suggesting that these Arabs were doing something anti-Islamic or un-Islamic, right? And that, of course, is problematic. Maybe at this point, I mean, we can do it now, we can do it later. I can bring up, I've got this document on slavery here. But I think the entire thing is to distance Islam from any sort of slavery, right? So, hey, these Arabs were doing this, or here were some people claiming to be Muslim, but they weren't following the Islamic doctrine or text or whatever the case is, right? That's the whole, to my ear anyway, that's the whole approach that he's going to take here. Not to deny that there was some sort of, well, he may deny some slavery. We need to see what else he's going to say, but certainly that it's un-Islamic to take slaves. So
can I just add on to something what you were just saying there, Robs? You're saying that this guy is trying to distance himself, and that's the point, isn't it? Not remove Islam from slavery, but distance Islam from slavery, and there's a difference between the two.
That's a good point. Yeah.
To remove something, it is no longer there; it is non-existent. To distance yourself is to still be within the vicinity, albeit to a greater or lesser distance. I'll give an example. If you remove, say, the milk from, say, a cereal, the milk is no longer in the bowl; it is just the cereal. If you dilute the milk, that is pour some water into the cereal while the milk's there, the milk is still there. The volume of the milk will differ. So I'm trying to freestyle an illustration here, but the point being, this is what Muslims are trying to do. They're not trying to remove Islam from slavery, because there's nothing in the Hadith or the Qur'an that can actually quantify and qualify the removal of Islam from slavery. What they're trying to do is distance themselves. And by distancing themselves, there is almost like a partial acceptance that it's there, but they're trying to remove themselves from the guilt of it.
Yeah, the culpability is not there any longer.
Yes, to try and say, hey, it doesn't apply today.
Because of the implications, because of today, a Muslim cannot turn around and say, yes, slavery was there, it was condoned by Muhammad and more so by our God, because of the very people that also, it's not just the slavery, it is what color were those peoples that are put into slavery as well. That too has to be brought into the conversation.
And I think at this moment in time, it probably will be useful just for me to share my screen briefly for part of this document, and we'll come straight back to this in a moment. So here's some documentation from Takia Watch, Simon from Sweden. He put this together some time back. The Arab slave trade, the sub-Saharan African trade, around the year 1600 to 1980. How many slaves? Around 120 million African slaves. Men were castrated, women taken as sex slave. And here are the Islamic countries that were the last to abolish slavery, pressured by the West. So we can see Qatar, Bhutan, Niger, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, all in the sort of 50s and 60s, as late as Mauritania in 1981. And there's a photo of some of the slaves and the slave owners from Zanzibar. So this was, I'm not sure exactly when this photo was taken. There was also a BBC documentary on it as well. Europe didn't have a monopoly on slavery. Muslim traders also export as many as 17 million to the coast of the Indian Ocean, Middle East, and North Africa. And there's some books here as well. For those interested, you can take a screenshot or have a look at that. Here, Simon lists some of the books and some documentaries that you can access as well. And then there are some hadiths, which we can get into, right? Things like, Sahih Bukhari, book 6, I guess that's 60-80. You, true Muslims, are the best of peoples, as you bring them with chains on their necks till they embrace Islam. Now, I can imagine, and here's again, those people who will enter paradise in chains. I can imagine Muslim apologists saying, no, well, that doesn't mean that was slavery. That just means that, they'll try to interpret that as something metaphorical, right? And there's more here that we can get to if necessary. So I'll leave it there for the moment, and we'll go back to stops. But because I think this will be something that will come up as as you continue through. Stop. So go ahead.
I'm not different Arabs. I agree with some Arabs did something evil. Now Arabs are doing it. Look.
So you're saying, wait. The colonial powers in Europe enslaved all those people because of Christianity. Is that what you're saying?
Because of Christianity.
Yeah, because you don't want to say Europeans or Arabs. You want to say Muslims. Because I said Arabs and he corrected me. He told me, no, not the Arabs.
No, because I would say in Christianity, in the Bible, it encourages you to enslave people.
Indeed, there is a passage of the...
Okay. I don't know why people do this. I don't know why people say, well, in the Bible it says you should enslave people, and in the Quran it says to free people. That is untrue. I don't understand why so many Muslims do this. They find a sentence which in some aspect or other says that you should be nice to slaves and you should try and free them. Okay, yes, this exists, but it also exists in the Bible. What, however, exists in the Quran is dozens of sentences relating to enslaving people. This is the problem.
But I thought the Bible was corrupted from the Muslim point of view, so it seems strange that whenever it's beneficial to the Muslim, he would quote a corrupted book.
Yeah, this is also true. But how many? This is the thing. How many times in the Quran does it mention the people that the right hand possesses? So every time that it does so, then you just substitute that with slaves, and then you have the picture. So I don't know how many, like 50, 60 pages full of evidence regarding slavery in Islam. So you cannot go and say that Islam abolished slavery. That's absolute, total nonsense, and it's highly dishonest. We know that people went up all the way to Ireland to go and capture women because they were blonde and had blue eyes, and they had higher prices on the market in Damascus, for example. And Eric Ingram, references, please. No, I'm not going to do this here and now. We're watching a video, we're critiquing a video. If you want to do this, come on the Gin and Tonic show next week, or get personal or whatever, contact me and I'll give you all the references. But here now to scream for references, no, we are not here at Varsity, and we are not delivering a dissertation here on every single item. Here, you just need to take my word for it that I have 50, 60 pages of evidence, and you are being dishonest if you say, well, without the references, I will not believe you. Go and read the bloody Quran.
I think it's also worth mentioning that, Robs, you put up a point about certain countries that have only in recent decades abolished slavery. I would go as far as say that's officially, but unofficially in the Islamic world, slavery still goes on, because in recent times we've come to learn the Qatar 2022 World Cup has actually had investigations with reference to the stadiums and the building preparation for the World Cup in 2022, and the link with slave workers to that to the building of those stadiums. So it's not as if it's something that has been abolished; it's more something that's been kept underground.
Well, yeah, and I wonder whether in Brunei they're going to introduce slavery again,
or has it not been abolished in the first place in Brunei?
This I wouldn't know.
Well, I would say that in such countries as Brunei, it probably hasn't been abolished. When you're thinking about stoning homosexuals or adulterers, that would be the greater of, if you like, in comparison to, as far as the crime is concerned, in comparison to slavery. So if they're emboldened to say we're going to stone adulterers and homosexuals, the fact that they've still got slavery going on would be a minor irrelevance. In their way of thinking, of course.
Yep. Continue.
Yep, go for it.
Not the Orthodox one. Don't touch your neighbor's slave or whatever. It's part of the Ten Commandments.
No, I know Jesus said in the New Testament that if you're a slave of someone, stay a slave until I come back.
No, I mean the...
Okay, the funny thing is, I've looked for this. I have not been able to verify his claim. Is there any Christian who knows this, that Jesus actually said, because stay until I come back? I don't know this.
It's not there. It's not there. It's yet again a Muslim quoting a scripture like they do in any other scripture, whether it's the Hindu scriptures or the Sikh scriptures, making a statement, a bold statement, knowing that that it's not going to be challenged. It's the same technique that you get from your scholars for dollars from the platform. Make a statement and then move swiftly on. And hopefully somebody in the audience will catch that comment, take it as gospel, and walk away thinking that's what the Bible teaches without verifying it themselves.
Okay.
Commandments of the Catholics. Well, there's one of the commandments that says don't touch your neighbor's slave or whatever, something like that. I actually have the 10 commandments.
No, my point is, I'm not talking about Christianity. To be honest. What I was talking
what
about,
exactly are you talking about? The Europeans and the Arabs? Is that
no. When I was talking to James, he tried to say Islamic servitude is the same as European slavery.
Okay.
So he tried to say Islam. If he says some Muslims, I'm not going to justify every Muslim's action. Of course, without any doubt, some Muslims out there that are
there
evil.
are many similarities between the two. For example, Europeans could not enslave other Christians, and Muslims could not enslave other Muslims.
No,
that's why, listen, and that's the example I want to give you.
You're wrong.
Wait.
And he is wrong on that. It is true that in Islam, there are instances where believing people are allowed to be taken as slavery. But then you have the same situation in the Bible where the Jews are allowed to take Jews. They just have special conditions, the same way as it's handled in the Quran. So there are different conditions for believers, as is the case for in Christianity and Judaism.
Example: when the Portuguese, they started their colonial empire. They were actually the first colonial empire, in case somebody doesn't know. They enslaved some of the blacks in Africa, right?
You're right.
They started trading them.
Yeah.
Right. When they came to Brazil, they wanted to enslave the natives.
Yeah.
And the priests converted a large amount of those natives before they could be enslaved, so they would not be enslaved, because they knew what would happen to them. It would be the same thing as happened in Africa.
When you
so
Africa, whole Africa, there was no Africa Christian.
There weren't too many Christians in Africa.
I didn't ask you if there's too many or not.
No.
Are you saying when the Europeans came to Africa, there was not even one nation? It was Christian nation.
No, there were Christian nations in Africa, but they were not the main. Okay, there you go.
Did the Christians?
They were not the main.
Where did they come from?
They were not from here. They were not the victims of slavery. I know the kingdom of Makuria, which is south of Egypt. It was it was a Christian kingdom, and they actually they beat back the initial Arabic invasion, and eventually they kept being Christians. They were Coptic Christians, if I'm not mistaken. But let's not talk about that.
So what are we talking about?
We were talking about the comparison between the Arabic slave trade and the European slave trade.
No,
I want to tell you that it's not that different. The two are not.
No. Listen carefully. And now, when you say Arabic, as I've mentioned, I'm not here to defend what every Arab did or what every Muslim did.
Good.
I'm here to defend Islam.
Okay, this is quite strange. If Muslims take Islam as a basis, and they go and they say, well, in the Quran and the Sunnah, if they are Sunnis, in the Quran, the Sunnah teaches us how to do this. And it's okay with Allah because Allah actually made slaves. And we've seen in reading the Quran last week even, we saw that there are different groups, that there are different rules for the freeman, for the female, and for the slave. We saw this, so there is no way that you can deny this. So I don't know what he's trying to do. So if a Muslim now says, well, I'm going according to the Quran, and then if I have killed a slave, then you can kill one of my slaves. That's exactly what it says in the Quran. Now, if a Muslim does that, he is going according to what the Quran says. And the Arabs were the first Muslims. So in this case, we have the Arabs who are Muslims doing what the Quran tells them. So there is no way to differentiate between any of these people. So I don't know what he's trying to do here. If he's trying to say, well, I need to have the Islamic text only, and in there that later on he's going to say, well, you see, it says there free a slave, or it is sunnah to free a slave. I don't know if this is where he's going. I forgot what the end of the video is. So for me, this is quite strange that he's trying to differentiate this here.
So let's just, because he wants to defend Islam, right? And he claims that Islam does not condone or promote slavery, right? So again, I'm just going to swap over to this page here. Hopefully that's viewing to everybody. So here's some of the hadiths. There's Abu Dawud 334094. The Prophet bought Fatima, a slave which he donated to her. That's a Sahih Hadith. And then we have Ibn Majah. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly. The Prophet bought Safia, his wife, for 7 slaves. Another Sahih Hadith. In the life of Muhammad, obviously that's page 405, he collected them black slaves, men of no descent. Sahih Bukhari 215-103. Aisha further said, once the Prophet was screening me, and I was watching the display of black slaves in the mosque. Hadith Sahih Bukhari 991-368. A black slave of Allah's apostle was at the top. I guess that's of its stairs. If its stairs, that doesn't make sense. Of its stairs. And then Sahih Bukhari 873-182. Allah's apostle was on a journey and he had a black slave called Anjasya. Thank you, Anjasya. And he was driving the camels very fast. Al-Tabari, the Prophet gave him a slave as a present, right? So if we take these as being true, and it carries on further down here, Sahih Muslim 3901, should I say, the permissibility of selling animals for animals of the same kind and of different quality. Allah's apostle said, sell him to me, and he bought him from 2 black slaves. Now, I can't remember, stops. Who was it that he bought here for the 2 black slaves? It doesn't say there specifically, but I'm sure you remember.
No, I don't.
Oh, okay. He bought somebody specifically for the 2 black slaves. So obviously...
there's a lot of references. You have this a lot of times where somebody came to him and said, okay, what do I do with these 6 slaves? They're too much for me. I can't afford them. So he sold them, kept 2 for himself, sold 2 to others. And Muhammad was like heavy into slave trading. And it says so even in the Sunnah. If you read the biography, that he went to Syria, for example, and he came back with weapons and slaves. So you can't absolve Muhammad here of anything. It's impossible. It's part and parcel of it.
But
yeah.
This goes back yet again to the kind of preaching that you're going to get in the Western world, where you're a minority religion, because they can't verily turn around and say, we have to say that slavery is a part and parcel of the Islamic deen, because the implication it will have in the Western world. But the further east you go, the more slavery you're going to see. But just in all those texts there, just to reiterate the point I brought out earlier on, there were 2 patterns there. One of them was slavery. Did anybody else pick up on the second pattern in those texts that were read out?
No.
They were black.
Oh yeah. This was coincidence.
No, but it's not coincidence, is it? It's not. And anybody you'd have to be stupidly perverse or hopelessly ignorant to not see the agenda there and the mindset of what's taking place. Because you see, it's one of those examples where I say, let's get all the scriptures that talk about slavery within Islam. But also there was one where I think it was, which prophet was it, that prayed that one of prayed about one of the prophets will be one of the family descendants of Shem, Ham, or Japheth, the sons of Noah. One family would slave the other family's offspring later on in genealogy as time moved forward. I forget what the reference is, and I can probably get it for next week. So you can see the pattern and mentality of Muhammad there, right from the earliest parts of Islam, that he clearly had a contempt. Because one of those points that you brought out earlier, it talks about men of, was it no origin?
Yeah.
There you go. What is he trying to say by saying men of no origin? What do you think was the context?
It's like a derogatory term, right?
What derogatory? But what else could it imply?
Okay, tell us.
Well, if they're of no origin, they've got no history. Then what he's basically saying, they're like animals. They have no origin. Their origin is from animals. What else could he mean by that?
Yeah.
So, okay.
He's not claiming they're of noble descent.
That's a possibility, yeah.
They have no, their origin is inconsequential as it is to an animal. An animal's descendants, or point of origin has no relevance. So in the same way, these black people, they have no relevance. They're the same as an animal.
Yeah. And
TDS
there's a
Dave is
question, TDS,
you
with
go
the
first.
slaves to be emancipated. Remember, we had a show a couple of weeks ago where I went into the different versions of slavery and how you can manumit so what happens, because there was a problem that if a black guy was freed in the middle of the desert somewhere in, I don't know where, in Ria, what does he do? Is he going to walk all the way home? No, because then somebody's going to pick him up and say, well, you are now my slave. And to prevent that, number one, they got a piece of paper which said, no, this is a freed slave. He's allowed to travel freely. But what actually happened is that he was absorbed by the tribe. He went into the pool, as it were, as a common property of everybody. So that he was free on the one hand, but he was still part of the group and he had to work for them in as part and parcel of his existence, and for this he got paid. But he did not have the same, let's say the stigma, or he did have some rights. He was asked if he wanted to do things, so the status was very different. But there are a lot of different levels that a slave could have, because it was very common for slaves to be shared by people. So if one of them then sold his share to somebody else, or somebody else inherited it, it's immensely complicated, all the different combinations that you have around this.
Can I just bring out a point? I don't want it to be considered irrelevant, but I think it's worth adding, considering that we are talking about slavery and the mindset of Allah and Muhammad. The significance of the color of the people as well, from another point of view that Muhammad had. I just want to read a couple of surahs. Do we have the time for that?
If you keep it brief, yes.
Yeah, go for it. Do you want to put it on screen or share your screen? Or
I'm reading it from another source. It says,
okay.
you should listen to, this is taken from Sahih Bukhari, Book 9, 89-256, and narrated by Abbas. Also said, you should listen and obey your ruler, even if he was an Ethiopian black slave whose head looks like a raisin. Okay, that's one. Then there's another one that goes down further. There are so many, but where's the other one? Yeah, this is from Ibn Ishaq. A man of Baal Jinn told me that he was told that Gabriel came to the apostle and said, there comes to sit with you a black man with long flowing hair, ruddy cheeks, and inflamed eyes like two copper pots. His heart is more gross than a donkey's. Then there are other ones that refer to whoever sees a black man, it's as though he saw the face of Satan. So it's when you add the identity of what Muhammad had with reference and his attitude towards black people, and how gross they were in his opinion, how less of a human being they were in his eyes, then you add that with the slavery surahs and hadith, then you're really getting a fuller picture of what the mindset was. That's why I wanted to bring it out.
Cool. Very good.
All right, shall we continue?
Yeah, go for
I
it.
said to him, Prophet Muhammad clearly said in the hadith, he said Allah will be an opponent of someone who goes and enslave 3 people. Meaning you go to Africa or you come to Europe, someone's walking, you kidnap him and they say my slave. Because you have to know that some people are doing it in Africa. And the scholars won't against that because there's a clear hadith. And what I was talking about, that the servitude in Islam, the reason, and Islam never started this anyway, it was there already. But Islam
was there long ago.
Yeah, long ago, yeah. And I think you said that the Egyptians started it last time.
I'm not sure if the Egyptians started it,
That's
but they
what you
were
said.
one of the main, one of the
I think
first
in a way I agree
civilizations
with
a
you.
big
I think in a way I agree with
with
you.
the Egyptians. I would say that.
Yeah, I think I agree with you in a way.
I think the Chinese or the the Mesopotamians had slavery. At least I don't think so. I think they had like servants or something.
Yeah,
like
that's what I'm talking about. In Islam, there's something called
it
servants.
exactly slaves.
Yeah, it called servants. And Islam, those servants who we take them in a war booty, they have many ways for them, for us to enslave, to free them. One of the ways that Prophet Muhammad said, in order for you to enter paradise, one of the path to enter paradise, to free a servant. Likewise, if imagine I say, Wallahi, I swear by Allah, tomorrow I'm going to fast, and I don't fast. So one of the options for me to expiate an oath, I have to free a servant. Understand? So there was many routes.
Yeah, stop it there. Stop. Yeah, so obviously he's changed the word to servant here, right? So that went sort of unbeknownst. But then the claim is that Muhammad said that one of the ways to paradise is to free a slave, right? Well, if that's the case, and paradise was the place that everybody wanted to go, that in and of itself should have stopped everybody from going to continue with slavery, right? If you care about paradise, that is. So, firstly, we don't know if that is in fact the case. I don't know if you know of a verse that he's referring to. But even if that were the case, we also know that Muhammad traded slaves, right? So this seems like an offhand comment or something that said, even if it was in the tafsirs or the hadith of the Quran, that wasn't mandatory, and certainly people didn't seem to follow it.
But you don't know. Let's assume for a moment that Muhammad did say that. He may have said that at the earliest point of his prophethood, when he said a lot of nice things, like there's no compulsion in religion. So there are things that were later then abrogated. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is, if he said that, that would be the one and only time that he ever did say something like that. Because if he'd said it on numerous occasions, we'd know about it, because we'll have come across those phrases, quotes, and sayings a little bit more frequently than we have done. So when you compare that with the numerous texts and verses and ayahs and surahs that talk about you can have slavery and it's okay, it's condoned, well, where do you go with what is the final answer? Do you go with the one quote that was said over here, or do you go with the 50 or 60 that was over there? And logic would dictate you go with the 50 or 60. That would be where the answer lies, not with the one isolated quote over here.
Okay. And also, of course, he traded them, didn't he? So if he was an example, then surely he would be the one teaching everybody what to do, right? You can say one thing, even if we accept that he said it, and do another, which is obviously hypocritical, right? If you say something and you expect others to follow you, and you are claimed to be an example, which Muslims claim today, then surely he would have had no slaves, right?
Exactly. Yeah. TDS, I'm sorry, I wasn't quite clear. What I was trying to say is, yes, you can free slaves. You can free slaves regardless whether they are Muslim or non-Muslim, but there are different consequences from the way that you free them. So yes, in theory, they would be free, but in practice, they would be absorbed, because it's very difficult for a slave to actually be free and go back home. So this is, but it did happen. Okay, so it's very difficult to have one answer to this question, because it is quite complex. The other thing I think we had this last week, where somebody said, "Well, you can't marry certain people," and we saw exactly that the Quran specifies that you are not allowed to have sex and you cannot marry any married woman except if she's a slave. Then you are allowed to have sex with her, and then she can, even if she's married, and then she can go back to her husband. Now, you cannot do that if this is not a slave. So, you what you would be doing is you would be contradicting the Quran, which says you cannot have sex with a free woman, but you can have sex with a slave even if she's married. So you can't say that these are just servants or something, because that would mean they are free people, free women, and then you wouldn't be allowed to do that. So you would be contradicting the Quran.
Yeah, there we go on screen there, right? Hang on one sec, stops, and there we go on screen. Quran 4:3, marry women of your choice, 2, 3, or 4, ... or the captives and slaves that your right hand possesses, right? So somebody was asking in the chat. So
do you have 424?
Probably. If not, I can quickly bring that up. Let's just quickly bring that up.
No, I thought this is on the same page, like a few up or down.
Let's just see if we've got 4. Yes, there we go. So with those of whom you enjoyed sexual relations, give them their mahar, gift money, as prescribed. And the tafsir, you are allowed to use your money to marry up to 4 wives and for as many female sex slaves as you like. Allah's statement, enjoy them sexually. That's the tafsir by Ibn Kathir 424.
Okay, I think that's very clear. I think there's no two ways that you can now go. What Shamsi is doing is just, it's apologetics. So, yeah. Okay. Shall I continue?
Yeah, go on.
Not because Prophet Muhammad said, Abu Bakr, Umar, let us go to Yemen, let us go to Europe and just kidnap people and enslave them.
I'm not presenting.
Yes, you are. I've
Oh,
got you
really?
presenting.
That's
Okay.
why I
See,
challenge
okay,
anyone to
now
bring me
I-
one hadith, authentic hadith, or one verse says go and take people as a servant or slaves.
Okay, I think we've shown it, but also notice what he does there. Okay, so this is
Yeah.
a straw man. Give me exactly what I'm asking for these words. If you don't give me these exact words, then it didn't happen, right? And this is often used by apologists down in Speaker's Corner, right? They present straw man, which they then can quite happily knock over and say, show me, you know. And obviously they do the same to Christians down there, right? Show me where it says this, this, and this in the Bible. If you don't show me this, then it hasn't happened, right? So they do it both ways, right? And this, of course, is a straw man, as we've shown. You know, here it is again, just in case you missed it. Quran 4:24. So those whom you have enjoyed sexual relations, give them the money. And it talks about, there's the tafsir from Ibn Kathir, and you're allowed to marry 4 wives and as many sex slaves as you want, right? So, I mean, now how is he going to explain these things away, or what your right hand possesses, right? And that's the key thing, isn't it? That slaves are a possession. They are your property, just like animals, or, you know, a house or a van or a caravan or whatever else you might be owning. That's exactly what they are, right?
And as Rob always said, it would have been so easy for God to say in the Quran, listen, you are never under any circumstances allowed to own another human being as an object. It would have been so easy.
But also, I think you also have to look at the dialogue as well. It says there what your right hand possesses. It's not about what you possess, it's what your right hand possesses. And why does Allah use the term what your right hand possesses? Now, why do you think that is?
Isn't that the dominant hand?
That's right. It's symbolic of being your right hand is symbolic of what's your strong arm, you know, your possession arm. It's like, you know, and it also signifies relationships, you know, like he's my right hand man, meaning that's the kind of relationship that you have with that person, that he, you know, he's got your back, he's got your side, you know, you have an intimate relationship with such a person that if any situation arises, that person's going to be there for you and you will likewise be with him. So for Allah to use the term what your right hand possesses, that's really kind of reinforcing the ownership that you have over those possessions, in this case, sex slaves.
And there it is again, just in case anybody is missing it. Quran 4:3, marry women of your choice, 2, 3, or 4, or the captives and the slaves that your right hand possesses. And here is Ibn Kathir's tafsir. Allah's statement, or satisfy yourself with only female captives, for it is not obligatory to treat them equally. Rather, it is recommended, right? So it's recommended, but not obligatory.
I think that should be clear enough.
But do you think that most Muslims are going to accept this? No, probably not, right? But it's like you say, right? And the response stops to what you were saying, which is, hey, God could have come down with the first message. One of the first messages out of the cave, presuming he knew who he was speaking to, and it was clear, instead of him having to go find out from other people who they thought he was speaking to in the cave, right? Because he heard a voice. But let's put all of that aside and assume that he was actually speaking to somebody. One of the first things that you think would be a moral injunction would be the prohibition on slavery, right? And the response from certain Muslims is, but hang on a moment, Rob, that Allah didn't want to do that, because look, the whole economy, you know, part of the economy ran on slavery, right? And what happens if you remove this? How would they continue going? Because slavery was a big part of the economy. It was how they were operating in that time. And I'm listening to this going, hang on a moment, this is God, right? If God thought this was the right thing to do, then the people, you know, and if you claim that everything's a test, then the test is to do the right thing and take the hardship, right? If this is I'm only going by what you as a Muslim claim, right? If this is all a test, then do the right thing and suffer, or, you know, labor under the test, if you like, to show that you are in fact a good person. So this whole thing of, hey, it might have impacted them negatively. Well, so what? If they were doing the wrong thing and Allah or Muhammad came along to tell them to do the right thing, then they need to suffer, right? Just like anything else. If they're doing it and it's a test, this is no excuse.
It just seems the more that we're going through the Islam and what it teaches on a weekly basis, that the book made clear, the book that's supposed to be easy to understand, seems to be easily understood by those who are not Muslim, and it seems to be hard to understand for those who are Muslim.
Yes, or just not wanting to understand that, because as we've talked about before, especially Muslims in the West, they've grown up with a different set of moral values, and now they either read this book or don't read the book, or read it and ignore it, and they have a conflict. And what do they do now? And so now there's this desperate need to either try and reconcile it, to ignore it, or to sidestep it and tell you that it means something else. And this is not a problem in the Middle East; it's only a problem here, right? And this is what Shannon is doing here as an apologetic.
This goes back to to repeat a point earlier, that there are two faces of Islam. You have the Islam where it's in Islamic controlled countries, where it's a state religion. You have that version of Islam, which will be, what your right hand possesses, slavery and such, and racism. Then you have your Islam in countries where it is not the dominant religion. And then you have the mentality, depending on the percentage that you are as to in the community. If you're a minority, you behave like lambs. If you're on equal footing, you behave like foxes. And if you're gaining a majority, you behave like wolves. And this kind of like facade or front window dressing, which is what we've got here, is exactly what we'd expect in a country where it's behaving like a fox.
Yep.
Guys in the chat, just ignore this guy, okay? And like, he's made the same claim that we've just refuted, because Shamsi just said, Jesus said, "Be slaves until I come back," and we've already said this doesn't exist. So, this is, just forget about him. Just leave him, let him go and rant. Just don't feed the troll. Okay.
Eric Ingram, just to let you know, Eric, we've already shown you in the Quran 4 verse 3, where it says what your right hand possesses, not just slaves, but sex slaves. So you either haven't been listening, or maybe you went to the toilets and attended to some personal matter in the toilet. But we've already brought that up. It's been covered. Listen to the show again on Sunday.
No, Islam didn't come for that. No, that's our argument. But you talk about Arabs doing evil, I don't agree with you.
I'm talking about Arabic empires and Islamic empires enslaving other peoples. That's what
I agree with you.
Just finish this one. Listen. Even though it does state in the Bible about slavery, there are parts that speak about it. I'm not blaming Islam necessarily for saying, okay, you can go and enslave everyone. What I'm saying is, the Islamic countries did not have any opposition against the slavery that they were committing. In fact, it was well accepted inside their culture. I'm not talking about, I don't want to delve into what's written in the Bible, what's written in the Quran. That's not my main point. Which one are you talking about? History is what I'm talking about.
I understand that, but
what actually happened was that many Islamic empires committed slavery, which was not better than the European
Ottoman Empire, I believe they did something wrong as well, without any doubt. But you cannot compare the European one. Anyway, forget.
Why not?
Bro,
because the Europeans were more successful in their slavery.
No, they were successful. They started it first. They initiated it.
No, they didn't.
They did it. That's why
you want to stop it there, Stops. I mean, that's not true, is it, as well? Yeah. The Atlantic slave trade was way after the Islamic slave trade started in the 600s, right? Let me read that again here.
I don't even remember when this started.
The Arab slave trade was around 600 to 1980, give or take.
But America was 1492. I mean, that's when it was discovered, so it must have been later than that. So it's automatically later.
Yeah. So this idea that,
but the question is, were there slaves in Europe before the 10th century?
I think the word slave, doesn't it come from Slavs?
Yes.
It's actually not related to, the word originates somewhere in the Balkans, if I remember correctly. But I stand to be corrected on that. But I know.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. Yeah.
Okay, that's the word. But the question is, were there slaves in the region? Because this I don't know. Okay, I'm too lazy now to go to Google and say who was the first slave.
Yeah, but I think his claim was that that the Atlantic slave trade was earlier, and that's simply not the case. Right?
No, that's definitely wrong. Yeah,
and also the context of the Atlantic slave trade is different, because it wasn't as if white colonialists went into Africa and started just kidnapping randomly or deliberately certain black people to ship them off to the Americas. It was actually black people selling black people, because in their own if you like, wars and tribal wars that they were having within Africa, one would conquer another tribe and take those males into slavery, and it was those males that they took into slavery that were sold as slaves to the white slave owners. That's how the trade started. So in the African civil wars, the minor civil wars that were taking place between one tribe and another, when one if you like, succeeded in dominance over another tribe, that took those people into slavery and sold them off as slaves. It wasn't as if white colonialists were getting off the ship and jumping onto the land and just randomly or deliberately taking people and putting them on a ship against their will. They were actually purchased. That is not being mentioned as well in this discussion. So the whole context is different.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think somebody in the chat there, reactionary, I think is a Muslim, saying they had serfdom. Well, you can have serfdom, but that doesn't negate slavery, right? So you can have other labels you want to give it. You could have lesser forms, or you could have employment in inverted commas, but you clearly had slavery, and that's the thing we're critiquing. So anything else that's lesser than slavery is not a response to the slavery itself. Telling me you had something else doesn't negate the fact that you had slavery. And I hope you'll be honest enough to concede that not only does Islam have it, but it condoned it. At no point did it outlaw it, which, as we've pointed out earlier, could easily have been done by Allah, outlawing it entirely. And anybody that suffered, well, that's just a part of the test of being a moral person, and that never happened.
And that's the point. Yeah.
That where a nation focused on people's skin color, and I think I have to study about European slavery more, because I never studied about it. When I did study about it, it was, to be honest, it's very, very disgusting.
Bro,
very, very disgusting. It was a law of the country.
Too were sold to them by Arab merchants.
Yeah, even like, forget about the Arabs one. I'm talking about the one you go into Africa, setting up fires in villages, bro, just for the people to run away and enslave them.
Common way of taking slaves.
Bro, I think I have to send the article. Let me send this article and study.
Not have a lot of
stop there again. This is just a matter of a tactic, right? And so this is a tu quo quo fallacy. Bringing up this is a distraction, right? Hey, we weren't the only ones doing it. There were other people doing it as well, right? So now he's going to go into talking about or at least for this moment, he's talking about the Arab slave trade. Well, none of that condones or apologizes for your slave trade. Nobody's denying that other slavery was going on. But now focusing on the other slavery as a way to distract from your slavery is not a response. Either you acknowledge you had slavery, or you try and respond and claim you don't have slavery. But pointing out somebody else's slavery doesn't condone or remove yours.
Yeah, this is the point I always make. I don't care who started it. I care who ended it.
Yeah, we look at the difference, obviously.
Let's not talk about Islam. Let's just talk about Arabs.
Yeah, I'm saying, okay. If you talk about Arabs, then I believe
I am
Arabs
talking about the Arabs, and the
I agree with you then.
the Arabic culture is very much linked to Islam.
No, Arabic culture is
It
not.
doesn't matter what's written in the Bible or
Arabic
in the
culture
Quran.
is not.
What matters is what Muslims and Christians did throughout history.
Arabic culture
That's
is
what
not.
actually matters.
What is Arabic culture? Go on.
What is Arabic
Yeah, go
culture?
on.
It's the culture that started in Arabia, that was expanded with the Muslim invasions, with the Arabic expansions into the Middle East.
So before Islam came,
Islam and the Arabic culture are very much linked together, just like Europeans are linked to Christianity.
Can you give me an example where the Arabs, before Islam came to them, they were going to African instead of Africans?
I don't understand the relevance of this question.
Okay, so it sounds
A tactic a Muslim will employ sometimes in discussions like these is answering questions where there are no answers, because in his mind and in the audience mind that are there to back their guy, oh, the Muslim guys just answer the question and the Christian or the atheist can't answer it, so they'll score that as a point.
Let me just listen to this again.
Invasions, with the Arabic expansions into the Middle East.
So before Islam came,
Islam and the Arabic culture are very much linked together, just like Europeans are linked to Christianity.
Can you give me an example where the Arabs, before Islam came to them, they were going to African instead of Africans?
Where Arabs went to Africa to take slaves.
okay, so he's asking, can Pavlov, and I'm sure Pavlov's not going to be able to do it off the top of his head, name an instant prior to Islam where Arabs were going to enslave people in Africa? We'd have to look that up. quite
What is the significance?
Well, exactly.
If you can, so what? And if you can't, well, so what? The point is, did Islam stop it? And that it didn't do. So, yes, it was common practice for the people at the time to take slaves, and Islam did nothing to stop it. They just fell right into step and said, yeah, just continue with it, because it was common practice. We see that in the Bible. It was common practice in those days to take slaves, and the Quran just copied it. So it didn't abolish it. It didn't say, no, you're not allowed to. It didn't say, please go and stop taking slaves. No, it gave some instructions on what to do with slaves, and if they were good and did blah, 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 how to free them or to manumit them or emancipate them or whatever you want to call it. But it didn't say stop taking slaves. Nowhere.
For Islam,
Yeah.
the Arabs did not have that power. They were very much fragmented.
No.
between each other.
They did have servants in Mecca. Like Bilal was a servant.
Okay, but it's very
Yeah,
hard.
but
It's
so what I'm
very hard
saying,
to talk
that was,
This is quite funny, because I always get this argument, well, look what we did with Bilal. Bilal was freed and he became a caliph. So, you can go from slave to caliph. Show me this in the Christians. This is what Rob was just saying. Show me exactly the same instance. You can't do that for Christianity, so that makes Islam better for some odd reason. But they always bring this as an argument that you can go from slave to caliph. And now he says, no, he was never a slave. He was just a servant.
that was Arabic culture.
Stop for a sec. I just want to bring this up here. This is on Wikipedia around the slavery. So there's the, well, at least part of the history of it. And the Arab trade of Zanti, Bantu slaves in Southeast Africa is one of the oldest slave trades, predating the European transatlantic slave trade by 700 years. Male slaves were often forced to work as servants, soldiers, and laborers by their owners, while female slaves, including those from Africa, were long traded in the Middle Eastern countries and kingdoms by Arab and Oriental traders as concubines and servants from the 7th century. In 641, a treaty between the Nubian Christian state of Makuria and the new Muslim rulers of Egypt, the Nubians agreed to give Arab traders more privileges to trade in addition to sharing in their slave trade. So this was already in 641, after they had conquered and ruled Egypt, right? And so that was shortly after Muhammad's death. So I just wanted to add that little bit there.
Thank you. Yeah, that clarifies it. This is the problem in Speaker's Corner. You don't have the resources available to you, so you can't do this. So,
Because you say it is Arabic culture to enslave. That's not Arabic culture to
No, I
begin with.
said that Arabic culture is very much linked to Islam, because Arabic culture didn't remain exactly the same as it was before Islam. Islam changed their culture, and their culture has been changing throughout history.
You're right.
And what I'm saying is that eventually those changes, plus the success that the Arabic expansions had, created the Arabic slave trade, which was also linked with Islam.
For example, give me one example.
What example of Arabic slave trade?
Yeah.
I can give you many examples.
Just give me one, I said.
Okay, one example. Let's talk about the Somalians. The Somalians, fair enough, they actually have a good point. I thought that the Somalians didn't have a point, but they do have a point. That they have a very different genetic makeup than other Africans. It is true, they are quite different from other Africans.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the Somalians did not suffer, at least greatly, from a slave trade. In fact, they were Muslims, and they were selling other Africans into slavery to other Arabs, and eventually to...
Ask him a question.
One example. You wanted one example. Of
Yeah,
Arabic
you're talking about, again, it's about individuals here. You're not talking about...
What's the example you want?
I'm talking about the Islamic empire that which Muslim look up to.
The Islamic empire
that was their main
Muslims look up
target, is to enslave people. Give me an example of that.
Okay, the Egyptian Mamlukat.
The Egyptian
Mamlukat of Egypt.
the Mamalik, their main target was to go around and enslave people.
But that was not the main target. But listen, the main target.
He's not listening. So what are you mentioning then? You say.
Okay, wait. You mean that the main target of the Europeans, the only target was only to get slaves?
That was a business, a big. That was their main business, to go to Africa and enslave them. It was a big business.
Yeah, it was a big business.
That's what I'm saying. So there was no Islamic empire did that. That's my point.
Dude, most of
you have to go see
a lot of troops in the Ottoman Empire and in the Mamluk were composed by slaves. They could not have their army without their slaves.
They were composed by slaves because the Ottomans took the people that when they took over a country, they took those kids and those people that were left over from their fathers died from war, took them to Istanbul,
that's what is.
enrolled them into the universities, and they became the.
Okay, so this guy is justifying how they kidnapped people to try and go to take them, if I understand him correctly, to take them and to go and educate them. So he's now trying to justify this kidnapping and slavery. But hey, we took them and we educated them. Is that what I'm hearing?
We are so good to our slaves. We treated them so well.
This is sort of desperate stuff, isn't it? As if this is somehow good, that kidnapping somebody against their will and then, going to teach them something, that somehow makes it better.
Why is what you are sharing not happening on the screen?
It is happening on the screen.
Okay, I can't see it in the stream.
Present to everybody. Sorry, why is it present to everyone? It should be on the stream now.
Yeah, sometimes it acts up, I remember.
Yeah. Just on another point there for a moment, because you talked about Somalia and there were things. So is that presenting to everybody? I hope so. Present to everybody. In Somalia, the Bantu minorities are descended from Bantu groups that had settled in Southeast Africa after the initial expansion from Nigeria, Cameroon. To meet the demand for menial labor, Bantus from Southeastern Africa, captured by Somali slave traders, were sold in cumulatively large numbers over the centuries to customers in Somalia and other areas of Northeast Africa and Asia. People captured locally were sometimes enslaved by the Somalis, mostly of this origin, right? And then it talks about the duties of the slaves, etc., right? So he mentioned that. So there is something about the Somali slave traders.
It's called blood tax. What is blood tax?
I don't know. Maybe.
Can you explain this?
You want to carry on in the meantime?
Okay, I'll carry on in the meantime.
Governors of the countries around an empire.
You see, who can
that
see
never
someone like
happened
that?
in Europe.
Yeah,
that never happened in Europe.
Yeah, but it didn't
Even
always
now,
happen
the
like
black
that.
people.
Anyway, let me just clarify something.
Many of the slaves
One thing I want to clarify something. I'm not blaming.
were rowers.
Hear me. No, hear me out.
Rowers.
I want to clarify. I want to conclude this. Yeah, I want to clarify because many cameras. When I was speaking to James or we're speaking about slavery, we're not blaming no one here now. I don't blame no British man or an English man or an Irish man or a French man because of something happened in the past. Because Allah told us in the Quran clearly, لا تزر وازرة وزر أخرى. A person should not be responsible for a sin that was committed by someone else. But the reason I was talking to James, because James, one of his main targets to come to Speaker's Corner, to give bad image about Islam, about Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
No, stop there again. I mean, that's his opinion. James is coming to expose what Islam actually says, and he doesn't like this, so he's giving a bad image. Who says it's a bad image? Follow the Quran, follow what Muhammad said. Muhammad had slaves. Was Muhammad a bad example? Obviously not. So this is just, now he's just losing himself here, right?
Yep. And by doing that, he's also saying that anybody who quotes anything against Islam is basically plagiarizing J. Smith as well. So it's like I'm insulting J. Smith. I'm also, if anybody does any research on J. Smith and quotes J. Smith, they're just blatantly plagiarizing J. Smith. So it's like two shots with one stone.
Yeah, but this is now one of the main sort of tactics by some of the apologists and Speaker's Corner, right? Ad hominem, or put down people who are coming here to expose or to critique Islam, right? They're coming here to make Islam look bad. Well, Islam does that on its own, right? All we're doing is showing that there's these sort of verses that either Muslims don't know about or do know about and try to hide or don't care about, right? So it's not that somebody else is making it bad. All we're doing is reading or bringing up the verses as James does, and he's very good at researching these things, right? So Islam's doing this job on its own. The fact that you don't want to let people know about it, well, that we can question your motives, but it's not like somebody else is doing this.
But what are you to expect from Muslims? If it goes back to what I've been saying for decades. If Islam is a lie, it can only ever be defended with lies. You cannot take a truth to defend a lie. Lies defend lies, and only truth can defend truth. Lies cannot defend truth, and truth cannot defend lies. This situation here that we're watching with Islam and slavery is a perfect demonstration of Islamic lies trying to hide a lie or to defend a lie. So what are we to expect? What are you to expect? What is the audience to expect from this discussion? This goes back to another point. It is the Islamic sources that define Islam, not Muslims. This guy doesn't define Islam. This is why discussions like these are pointless now. I'm getting to the point now with Islam and other discussions where the best thing to do is like what we do on the Friday night normally, where we're looking at the Quran and letting the Quran speak for itself and not letting Muslims tell us what it says. If we was to sit there and allow Muslims to tell us what it says, we'd still be on chapter 1 verse 1 trying to interpret it, you know. You know, because we would be in so much disagreement. Then they've now invented in the past, say, 2 decades, new phrases like, you know, maybe old ones I've never come across before. I know that it's been used by the Islamic world a lot more, like rhetorical devices. Or in Islamic, in the Arabic language, you can have one word that has 4 meanings. So in a sentence of, say, 10 Arabic words, you can have 100,000 interpretations of what that one sentence says then. So these kind of discussions with Muslims are pointless, and Speaker's Corner now, you know, from what I discern, is pointless when you got Muslim like this here, whose sole purpose is to water down and dilute what the reality of Islam is.
And also, there are some Muslims now who, and I've heard from a few of them, right, who are going, hey, we don't accept that either what Muhammad did or what the Quran says is applicable today, right? We think it's only for that time, right? So there are Muslims who are distancing themselves from the conduct of Muhammad and or what the Quran claims, and saying it's for that time. And this is a way for them to try and separate themselves from all of this sort of stuff. The problem is that's not clear in any of the sources, right?
But Rob, yet again, that's not distancing themselves. That's just another way of it. That's just another tactic of saying, in their own mind, with their cognitive dissonance that's taking place, they've got to find some way to rationalize it to the audience that knows this is clearly barbaric. You know, how many kinds of excuses can one religion make with reference to defending the ideology of its prophet? Oh, you got to read it in Arabic. Oh, you got to read it in classical Arabic. Oh, you've taken it out of context. Oh, this was a period of that time. That's what the world was like in that time. How many Mickey Mouse token excuses can the Islamic world come up with in order to dilute or distance or remove itself from these situations? So the Muslim that turns around and says, well, that's what it was like at that time, that's just his excuse to try and say, well, I accept it. I just don't accept it now. But he's still accepting it by putting it off at a different location. He's just removing the situation to a period of time in the past, but he's still saying it's okay. He's not condemning it. He's still condoning it, because that's why he says that's what the world was like at that time.
And by the way, you've just provided a definition of where infinity can exist in the real world. Because you asked the question, how many excuses can a Muslim find? Infinite. In my eyes. Sorry, that was a joke. Thanks, Dave, for the explanation with the blood tax. And this immediately makes me wonder where Hitler got his idea from, because that is exactly what he was doing. So I think he went scavenging in sort of other cultures, like even his swastika was stolen, everything was stolen. So maybe even this idea was stolen. So quite amazing.
So before you carry on, stops. Sorry. I mean, we can carry on in a moment. Reactionary is a Muslim who's watching. We've spoken to him before on other Hangouts, etc. I'm sending him the link, so hopefully he'll join us momentarily and he'll give us his perspective. So he has been chatting a little bit in the link in the chat there. I've just sent him the link because I've connected with him on Hangouts. So hopefully he will join us and we'll welcome him in a minute. So carry on from there, Stops.
Don't you ever dare you to try to compare what Prophet Muhammad and his companions did to European slavery. That was
okay. Stop there. So, Reactionary's joined us. Reactionary is a Muslim. We've spoken before. Welcome, Reactionary. How are you?
Hello, Rob. How you doing? Hi,
good,
Stops.
good. So, if you know Stops, if you don't know, Thunderous
is
a Christian. Also a fellow critique of Islam. So we're as you might have heard and you've been watching, I'm not sure how long, we're watching, critiquing this video of Shamsi, who appears from, certainly to my ear, at least to be claiming that Islam doesn't condone slavery. So do you want to, before we continue with the video at this stage, do you want to come in and share some thoughts?
If it's okay, I'll just watch along with you, and I'll
Okay, cool.
add my comments along with yours, if that's okay.
All right, cool. All right,
Okay,
let's go.
thanks.
Yeah, but I can't believe what he's doing here. Because what Shamsi is saying, once again, he is making the claim that what we just saw is not true. And that is that Muhammad eliminated slavery. And we've just seen that he did anything but that. And we've had, I don't know how many hadiths now which were classified as authentic, as sahih, by Islamic scholars. So it's the texts themselves that show that Shamsi is not telling the truth. So I don't understand why he would do that when it is so blatantly obvious that Muhammad was the last to abolish slavery.
Easy.
Well, I think, hang
Easy.
on there, stops. Hang on a moment there. I think there's also, I mean, I think you and I would accept that, as far as we can tell, Muhammad did release some slaves, right? But there's a difference between letting some go or allowing Bilal to go, etc., and outlawing
abolishing
the
it.
practice, right? I think there's a clear distinction between those two, and that mustn't be lost, right?
Exactly. Thunder, you said something?
Yeah, I forgot my points, but I think it was more of a reiteration of something that Lord said this evening anyway.
By the way, reactionary, if you want to say something, just shout in loudly, because if we're speaking, so at any point you want to join in and you want to give us your thoughts, then just start speaking and I'll tell everybody, including myself, to shut up and you can speak, right?
Yeah, cheers, Rob. I've got one quick comment then. From what I was told when I asked about slavery to certain people I know in the Muslim community, the answer was that there is nothing there's no Islamic text showing you how to go about obtaining slaves. So slavery is a practice that has existed in society, but Islam didn't show that it's something that's praiseworthy. However, there are many virtues in freeing slaves. So it's something that is encouraged in Islam, is to free slaves. And there are many ways in Islam. There are many different hadiths that show you that where an expiation for certain sins that you might do might be to free a slave, or if you have a slave and certain circumstances come to pass, then you free that slave. There's no examples of obtaining slaves when you do certain things. It's actually freeing slaves that's the virtuous thing to do. Sorry.
But does it not sort of like worry you though, reactionary, that in order to free a slave, you have to have committed some kind of sin in the eyes of Allah, whereas having the slave and freeing him anyway, irrespective of what your conduct is in the eyes of Allah, that should be the priority of letting the slave go, not the sin that you or the accountability you have before the God that you worship, would be one point I raised. And second of all, you're saying that Islam doesn't teach you on how to get slaves. Well, it didn't have to teach you if you already had the skill set to obtain slaves in the first place. So you're saying that Islam didn't, it doesn't condone, but it doesn't condemn slavery either, and that's the point, isn't it? It doesn't condemn, and it only seems to raise some kind of positive point is when you've got if you owe in God because of some kind of discrepancy in your conduct. So in effect, if you've gone and broken a law, that slave that you free has the value of the law that you've broken. So that actually reduces the slave to a crime, the value of the crime, rather than the dignity of the human being then.
Yeah, I'll say I wouldn't. I can see what you're trying to what point you're making, but I don't agree with it because.
Of course, you're not going to agree with it. With respect.
Yeah, I'll tell you why though. The reason is when you do certain things and you have an expiation, the means of expiation is usually an action which is considered a good deed. Now, one of the good deeds you would do is to fast. Another of the good deeds you might do is to spend in charity. And another of the good deeds to do is to free a slave. It's not just expiation of sins where freeing a slave is mentioned as a good thing. I don't remember the exact hadiths, but there are narrations where freeing slaves is a good action to do. So what Islam did, although it didn't sort of necessarily condone slavery or condemn it. What it did is it regulated it. So where slaves may have been mistreated in the past, Islam says it put certain criteria in place in order to keep slaves. I guess you could compare it to gun ownership in the United States, where people have the right to bear arms, but you know that there's going to be mistreatment of that law. So you would put in place certain means to prevent, what's the word? Misuse of arms. So you put in place background checks, making sure that people have a license to bear arms, and that license needs to be renewed every so often. Likewise, with cars, you have an MOT and a service that you have to do every year.
But I think reactionary, if we use your example of the guns, if we know that, let's just say we thought that that owning a firearm was a morally wrong action, right? And the government said, no, well, instead of banning something, we'll regulate it. Would we consider that the appropriate response to something that we agree is morally wrong?
So here is the point then. Is slavery in all of its forms morally wrong?
Yes, if we define slavery,
we'd have to agree on the definition. So our understanding of slavery today, from the sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to.
You made the analogy to the gun possession in America. Just to go on along with that, you do realize in America you can have black guns, nickel-plated guns, white guns, plastic guns, green guns. The guns in America come in all sorts of shapes, sizes, and colors. We also find that when we're talking about slaves in Islam, we're only talking about black people. We're not talking about Arab slaves. We're not talking about Caucasian slaves or Oriental slaves. We're only talking about slaves that seem to come from Africa. Only their color is mentioned. Can you explain that to me, please?
What, in Islam? No.
Well, we've read probably about 20 sources tonight, and 18 of them mention the color black.
I'm sure the Prophet ﷺ had a slave who was not black.
You're sure, but you don't know. So, with respect, you're guessing to get yourself out of. And I'm speaking to you with respect. Don't think.
No. But I'm guessing based on sort of a reasonable sense of.
There is a principle. I don't know if you know it. Called "Don't go beyond the things written." That is to say, if that's what the text reveal, let's go with what the text reveal. Let's not introduce opinions and thoughts and abstract concepts. So in this context, then you're guessing that Muhammad may have had a white slave, a yellow slave, or a brown slave.
Yeah. So I'm not guessing. My guess is based on a reasonable sense of certainty, because when Bilal is mentioned as a slave, his color is mentioned, so we know he was black and African.
But we also have other slaves that are mentioned are also mentioned by color as well. You know,
the slave in the Prophet ﷺ's household was not mentioned as being black.
How's it relevant though? Let me just check in. How's the color relevant at this stage? So we're just talking about slavery.
Yeah, the person who mentioned color is.
Well, I'm just checking, Thunderous. Is it because it was almost exclusively, if not exclusively, black, or is there what's the end sort of point around that though?
Because it's not just slavery. We're not talking about slavery. We're also talking about the dignity of the type of human being that we're talking about, and the mindset that Allah and Muhammad have of a certain type of colored human being and their position in society, that is as a slave. So you might not think it's relevant, but when we're talking about slavery in Islam, in the Islamic parlance, we're also talking about a particular type of human being that's put into that position of slavery and servitude, and it happens to be that it's a black person. So I think for me,
but you're inventing something now. That nowhere in Islam does it say that slaves are black.
Okay, so why is that? Okay, then when we're looking at slavery in Islam,
that's something that Christianity brought, actually. So you can't reflect it onto Islam.
Look, we're not talking Christianity here. We are talking about the Quran. So let's not introduce another subject that's irrelevant. Okay, we're talking about Islam here.
Yeah. So you're reflecting onto Islam something that is from Christianity.
No, we're not talking Christianity. Please don't mention the word Christianity again. It's not the subject that we're discussing this evening. We're talking about Islam, and when we're looking at the slavery verses in Islam, in the Hadith, their color seems to be mentioned repeatedly. Black slaves, black slaves, black slaves, 7 black slaves. You know, the text is there on the screen. You can read it for yourself. Why is it? Muhammad seems to want to mention the color of the slave because the color of the slave is significant. We do not get the color white, we do not get the color brown, we do not get the color yellow, but we always seem to find the color when it is mentioned, it happens to be black.
Yeah, I think you're sort of being a bit.
I mean, that's
you're picking at straws right now.
well, I think that's an extra point, and it's possibly a valuable point. But I think the bigger point is around slavery, and he's right. I mean, here it says, right, the Prophet bought Fatima a slave, which he donated to her, right? So clearly, if you accept the hadith as being authentic, and it says there Sahih Bukhari underneath as well, then clearly Muhammad participated in, I mean, this is just one example, but there are others, participated in slavery. So the fact that he said you can let slaves go, but he participated in, I think is problematic, especially if you're going to claim that he's an example to follow today, right?
Yeah, but and then once again, the word slave we're using the English word, which comes from, as Thunder mentioned earlier, it comes from the Slavic region. It's a term related to the people from that region. The word slave we're using today doesn't necessarily mean the same thing that would have been understood as an abd in the Arab world, particularly when Islam came and regulated it. That's something that might have a different meaning.
Why is it then so many translators of the Quran who have taken onus of and responsibility of translating the words of Allah use the word slave? If this word slave is not appropriate, then why not use the word servant? That would be a better terminology, surely, if that's the context being mentioned. But we don't find that. We find the word slave being mentioned because the image is there of the word slave being used, that you are under ownership by another human being who is your superior and has a power of authority over you.
Yeah, but I mean, even when you see translations of the description of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, sometimes you'll see him referred to as the slave of Allah. Sometimes you'll see him mentioned as the servant of Allah. So it really depends on the connotations.
No, you're a very good one, but it's not going to work because the relationship that you have in your religion with reference to Allah and God, because God and the human being, it is submission as a slave has to its master. So when you're looking at Muhammad being the slave of Allah, that is because the relationship that a Muslim has with his God is, by very definition of the word submission, is as a slave to a master. But we're not talking master and a God and a human being. We're talking about a human being and another human being. So that relationship with the word slave there has a different context altogether.
Sorry, you go ahead. You respond, and then I want to ask you something. Go ahead.
Okay. Do you think there are ever circumstances in which being a slave could be a beneficial thing?
It depends what you mean, I guess, in the sense of like, could it be better to be a slave than to be dead or to torture to madness? You could bring up an example like that, but I could equally ask you, is there something better that one can do with one's fellow human being than enslaving them, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
I agree.
But if we look at the hadiths here, right? They bought a slave, right? So when you buy something, that's property, right? You're buying something that's property. You don't buy servants. You will employ a servant, but you won't buy a servant. You will buy slaves, which is property, which is, ownership of something that is deemed to be your property, right?
Yeah, correct.
So I think your approach of saying, well, slavery today is not what it was then, in the sense of you saying or intimating that it might be a bit more like employment or being like a servant. These people were not free to leave, and they were bought, as it says there. And I think putting those two together, I think it's clear that they didn't have a choice, and they were not allowed to leave without severe consequences to their life or their physical, So
and also wives in the United Kingdom, like if you had a wife in the United Kingdom, let's say 200 years ago, she would be considered the husband's property.
I mean, that might well be the case.
Servant. Yeah, she was his property.
Okay, but reactionary. I mean, pointing to other religions and cultures doesn't clear Islam of this problem. What you're essentially doing is you are admitting that slavery was prominent, that Muhammad did it, but then saying, well, hang on a moment, you other guys were doing it 200 years ago. I'm not denying that that we or anybody else did it, but we're not claiming that we had the moral authority from God, and we're certainly not claiming to follow that today. And I think that's where
my point. Sorry, my point mentioning what the wife is that when we talk about a wife in the United Kingdom 200 years ago, we wouldn't put her on the same level as a slave when we think of a slave. So the term slave in our European mindset is something quite harsh and drastic. A person who would have received a dehumanizing position in society. In fact, I think in US law, it was considered they would have half the worth of a human being or something like that. What I'm trying to get at is Islam recognized them as human beings. It put in place regulations, and it recognizes that there may be circumstances in society where it can be beneficial for a person to be a slave.
But you mentioned earlier from the offset of this discussion that if you committed a sin, you could free a slave, so the slave becomes equal to the sin that you've committed towards God. So if you've committed rape or theft, you've reduced a human being who should have been free. You know, if that's the context of being free, if it's not willing servitude, then by implication it's slavery. And the only way to get free is if your master committed the sin. Then the value of the person becomes the value of the sin. In order for the person to buy freedom and freedom from guilt in their relationship towards God. So if a person committed rape, and in order to to appease the God that he's worshiping, he has to free a slave, and then it atones. Then you're basically saying that that rape is equal, that the slave is equal to the rape, or the slave is equal to the theft, or the slave is equal to the violent assault. So that means that's what the slave is. The value of the slave is just that in the eyes of God. That man committed rape, so he let go one of his slaves. So that slave is equal to the rape or the crime that he committed under the eyes of God.
Yeah, and so if you look at the
slave is equal, if you committed rape and you free a slave, then that slave's value is the same as rape.
Kind of. I mean, if you look at the circumstance, you mentioned that you looked at a number of hadiths earlier, which you would have described the circumstances under which a person is required to free a slave, and you'll find that there are many, not just one, and the types of sins which a person would do that would require them to free a slave are sins that most people would fall into. It's not the minority of people, it's probably the majority of people would fall into.
Would
you find that most slave owners would have to free many of their slaves?
But
they don't have to.
It's a good thing.
Yeah, but they don't have to, right?
No, like if you have
it's preferred,
three options,
but it's not a command, right?
It's a requirement. If it's an expiation, you would have to. It's a requirement.
Allah does not say in the book made clear, the book made easy to understand, free slaves, you should not have them. He basically says, well, if you commit a sin, then you could free a slave. That would be a good thing. But he doesn't actually say slavery is wrong. He does not say slavery is disgusting in my eyes. He does not say I made human beings from one human being. All human beings you should not have slaves in my eyes. You are all one brotherhood that I created you. He doesn't say anything like that. He doesn't condemn slavery. You could argue, well, he doesn't condone it either. No, he probably doesn't. But he uses terminology, and he uses a prophet. This prophet is the final prophet, the 124,000th prophet, and the role model for mankind, the mercy to mankind, who's been sent a book that was written in heaven millions and billions and trillions of years before it ever came to earth. Right, unchanged in heaven. It gets repeated from the angel Gabriel to Muhammad.
I think it was 50,000 years. 50,000 years.
We don't know. You're guessing. So
there's a hadith about it. So,
you keep saying there's this hadith or that hadith. I'd love to actually bring a reference rather than just say there's a hadith.
All right, sure.
But to go on, Allah does not make any of this clear. And I'm trying to speak to you respectfully that Allah never mentioned any of the things that you're talking about. You sound like a really nice guy, and you've got ideal moral values that we have. That there's a lot of things that you and I could probably talk about that are in common that we'd agree with, and that you probably have more in common with me in my thoughts and opinions on slavery than you do with your own God. But
let's put it in perspective. If you look at human history until now. Right, you and I are discussing from a vantage point of we're living in the year 2019 in Western Europe, whereas we're looking at a practice that has covered humanity since, I don't know, more than 1,000 years, maybe 2,000, 3,000 years. Okay.
Muhammad,
Now,
Muhammad
not only
Muhammad
not only is our
Thunderous,
viewpoint
let him finish.
skewed,
Let him finish, Thunderous.
yeah, not only is our viewpoint skewed from this perspective of time, but it's also skewed from the perspective of geography as well. Because even in today's day and age, in other parts of the world, slavery, I'm pretty sure, still exists.
Absolutely.
Now that slavery does, slave trade still exists,
Yes.
but also illegal types of slavery where it's called something else, human trafficking and other types
Yes,
of
absolutely.
human bondage. These still exist today.
I
So,
totally agree with you. But
yeah.
the point is, we're not talking about geography, and we're not talking about distance in time. We're talking about religion, not sociology, politics, or commercial activity. We're talking about a religion sent from, in your ascension, the true God, from the final prophet, the prophet that the Quran teaches is the role model for mankind. So it doesn't, you can point to it, well, we're looking at it from the vantage point of 2019, and that was some 1600 years ago. That's an irrelevant mute point when you're talking about your own God says this man is a role model, you should be following him. The movement, the linear movement of time going forward has an irrelevance to the kind of person you should be in 2019 with reference to the role model that you should be following, which in this case is Muhammad. And Muhammad, in the Hadith, and the God that you follow in the Quran are quite clear on their attitude about slavery.
Yeah.
So
also, in the UK, we have something called minimum wage.
But that's we're not talking about minimum wage.
Well, I'm trying. Well, you could argue the same point. How can you pay somebody less than a minimum wage? You know, that's it's not mentioned in the Quran.
But at least they got a wage. At least there is a wage, and people are fighting for that. We don't find, and that's, you can find atheists, Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, all fighting for minimum wage or raising the minimum wage level. We do not find Muslims in the Middle East at the time of Muhammad going all the way to today trying to free slavery or trying to condemn slavery. They don't. They can't.
Okay. That's fine. So from the Middle Ages till now, which other religion has mentioned ways in which to free a slave?
You don't have to. There's no obligation there. It is only suggested that if you do, it's a good thing, but you're not under obligation to do it.
So let's just be fair, at least, that Islam came along and it showed a number of ways in which to free a slave, and it showed that freeing slaves is a praiseworthy thing to do.
But it's
it also regulated slavery to make sure that they're recognized as human beings, to be treated, to be fed from the food that the master eats from, and to be clothed from the master's clothes.
Or the clothes that the master didn't want to use anymore. Let's not. You can use all these.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough. I know we're not going to agree, but it's worth the talk. Anyway, if it's okay with you, can we continue watching the video? I'd like to see what Shamsi's got to say, and we can keep.
Yeah. Let's stop. You've been very quiet. Is there anything you want to say, or should we carry on?
Yeah, I've been patiently waiting because I'd like to ask a question, because if actually is saying, well, there's a sentence in the Quran, there's a sentence in the Hadith that it is of benefit or it's encouraged to free a slave. If I step just a little bit back and I say, well, why would a God first create human beings as slaves and then tell the owners, no, you need to free them? That doesn't make sense to me. That's illogical. Why would a God in the beginning allow slavery? Why would a God put into a human being the desire to own another human being, only then 300,000 years later to say, no, I encourage you to not do that? Why do you think that is?
Well, it's the same thing with any sin. Obviously, you're asking the right question that an atheist would ask. Why did God create mankind to worship him if he's allowed them to not worship him? He's given them that choice, so how can they be to blame? And so it's the same argument.
No, it's very different. What I'm saying here, this is detrimental. This is actually really bad for the person who has no rights. I mean, if I look at a girl who is 14, gets abducted from her tribe, the tribe is killed, the entire village destroyed. She's dragged 1,000 kilometers back to Damascus. She's being raped on the way a couple of times by some guy. Then she's being sold, and then goes to the new master, where she has to do I don't know what, and then be available to have sex with the new master as well. I don't think that that is a very, very good thing, a very nice experience for a girl to have. And yet this God created this girl knowing full well that she would have experience, exactly this experience, and still creates that girl and creates the guy who rapes her and makes the guy feel good about it and tells the girl, you need to tolerate that. And that I don't understand that. Well, why do you think that is?
Well, let's put it from this perspective then. Let's suppose there's no regulation about how a slave is to be treated and how treatment is conducted. How would that lady who gets her family wiped out in a raid on her village, what would typically happen then with by a group that has no religion and no belief in these hadiths and so on?
No, I think you're taking the 15th step before the first. The first step is asking, why would a God create a girl to be raped, to be a slave?
That's the same thing. You have a child that gets abused. Why would God create a child to get abused by its own parents sometimes, or to starve to death? Why would why would God create an insect to be infested by other insects and eaten from the inside? It's not for us to question God. We don't question God. No. We don't question God as Muslims. He questions us. We don't question him.
Okay, but do you find that moral?
What I find moral is that he's put in place guidelines and regulations so that slaves don't get mistreated.
So you can go and kill somebody, but do it nicely.
No, even killing is forbidden in Islam. There's certain circumstances in which it's allowed, and that's laws of armed conflict for that. That's the modern terminology for what Islam.
I mean, let's try and keep it to slavery, because
but you can't say you can keep slaves but do it nicely. That doesn't work. Okay, so
well, the fact is, slavery exists.
Why do you think that
in most of the world slavery exists?
That's not the question. I said before, I don't care who started it. I care about who ended it. And this is the problem. Islam did not end it. Muhammad, okay, it doesn't matter. My question was, why do you think that a God would do that? You say, well, we don't question this. We just need to accept it. Okay, that's cool. But then if you say it's good that it is being regulated, wouldn't it be better to say, stop it?
That's from our perspective, but Allah is more wise and knowing than us, right? So of course. Obviously, if it was better to say, from my perspective as a Muslim, if it was better to say stop it, Allah would have said stop it.
So you don't think it would have been better to say stop it?
No. And once again, when we say the word slavery, I'm not talking about the way you've just described it. I'm talking about Allah put in place certain regulations.
But I mean, actually, how you define it and how the Hadith and the Quran define it are clearly different, because they do talk about buying and selling, which is property, and that's what we're talking about. You could buy them, have them sit at your table. That still makes them a slave. You could buy them, have them in the dog kennel outside. We're talking about the concept, not necessarily how you treat them. You could make an argument that are treated better than other places, but that's not the critique that we are leveling. So when you do mention that, that's outside of the critique, and it's not focused specifically on the critique of ownership of one human by another and prevention of them leaving you without some severe consequence. I think stops. Let's go on from here, otherwise we won't get much further here.
Yeah.
Okay. So
why did it?
I agree with you. There are some people, Muslims and Arabs, some people, and these people wrongly got it out and sacrifice the abomination. Me and you agree, except that because of something happened in the past. Because Allah told us in the Quran clearly, لا تزر وازرة وزر أخرى. A person should not be responsible for a sin that was committed by someone else. But the reason I was talking to James, because James, one of his main targets to come to speak his corner, to give bad image about Islam, about Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's why I was showing him that don't you ever dare you to try to compare what Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions did to European slavery. That was my main point. Okay. So I agree with you without any doubt. There were some people, Muslims and Arabs, did something evil and did enslave people wrongly without any doubt, and it's vice versa for the other nations. So I will agree. Me and you agree, except that what we're talking about, there was no Islamic empire. Their main target and business to go and enslave Africans. None of them did that. All right. None of that. All right. Salah. Now, I just want to mention something, which is I forgot to mention it when I was speaking to James. A nice benefit about, of course, Hamza will clarify that we're talking about the slavery issues, that we don't even use this term, that we're about the war captives. And I've clarified that. There's no need to clarify it more. I just want to add something, that our Prophet ﷺ and Islam did not come to enslave the people. Rather, has been mentioned, the origin of mankind to be free. No one should be enslaving no one. Understand? As for from the Islamic perspective, then that issue deals with the war captives. Not you go and enslave free people. And there's something which Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, there was many times, even the war captives, with the war captives, he let them go free, without any touching them. Sometimes, yes, if there's a wisdom behind keeping them, let them serve the Muslims.
Okay, this is where this is too much for me. Now, okay, I need to bring my old example, my favorite example of Muhammad telling his people, encouraging them to rape the female captives regardless of the prices. So Muhammad did not tell them, don't rape them. Muhammad did not tell them, let them go. Muhammad did not tell them, treat them with respect. Muhammad did not say any of those things. He says, enjoy raping them, enjoy having your orgasm, don't pull out, because God is going to decide. So his God is quite okay with these Muslims, and they say, we decided to have sex with them. It is not that we encourage or we inquired or we asked them and we were seeking their consent. No, we decided to have sex with them, and we were encouraged to enjoy ourselves to the hilt before we sold them on the slave market. So the only benefit, but Shamsi is not talking about that instance, the only benefit here was a nicer orgasm while they were raping the women. So we need to say, yes, there were instances where Muhammad encouraged the freeing of slaves, that he enslaved women himself, he enslaved people, he traded slaves, he exchanged slaves, he gave slaves as presents, he received a slave and had sex with a slave. And that we can't just say Muhammad did one thing and that is encourage the freeing of slaves. You need to give the whole bandwidth of the picture, what happened here at the time.
Of them without.
Sorry, any comments?
Yeah, just stop there. Let's just make sure we put this up for people, because people might think you know. So here's Surah 4:3, right? And if you fear that you will not deal justly with the orphan girls, then marry those that please of you other than women, 2, 3, or 4. But if you fear that you will not treat them, not be just, then marry only one, or those which your right hand possesses. So obviously that talks about what you possess, your property, i.e. slaves, right? And then if you read the Hadith, here's the Hadith about, we get female captives as our share of booty. And if we are interested in their prices, what is your opinion about coitus interruptus, us? The Prophet said, do you really do that? It is better for you not to do that. No soul which Allah has destined to exist, but will surely come into existence. So he's explicitly saying to them here, you don't have to withdraw before orgasm with regards to your booty, i.e. those that you have brought into slavery. So I think when you put that verse, that hadith together with this verse, that is what Stops is talking about with regards to raping your slaves. Because a lot of people go, oh, what are you talking about, right? You put those two together. At no point do these slaves, which are booty, have a choice about this matter. And so if they don't have a choice in your... Say again?
There's a dozen of these. It's not only one.
Yeah, well, I'm just pointing out two in case people...
Yeah.
I mean,
but some people say, well, maybe it's only one. No, it's not. There's a dozen. There's more than a dozen.
By the way, that statement about withdrawal whilst having sexual relations, that doesn't just apply to property, if you want to call it that. It also
No, it
applies to
doesn't.
your wives. But
Yes.
yeah, the
Does it matter?
one of the points here that you could argue sort of against you is when a slave bears the child of a slave master, does she remain a slave, or does she become free?
As far as I know, she remains a slave.
As far as I'm pretty sure she'll be freed once she gives birth.
I mean, if you can provide a verse, that's fine. But I think again, I mean that's okay, right? So you are.
Sorry, I'm not an expert on this topic.
No,
I'm just speaking off what I.
No, that's fine. I think
what
and that's fine. You're entitled to obviously respond. That's why we asked you to come on here, right? If you just sit here and agree or keep quiet, then you know there's no value in that. And I certainly won't speak for my colleagues, but I am not expecting you to be a scholar, and I'm not expecting. It's not here to make you look foolish. What we're asking for is your response to certain things here, and to have a discussion, right? And you are pointing out things that could conceivably you could say, hey, this was better than what was happening, right? We could be charitable and grant that. Let's say that was the case, right? I think what I certainly am saying, again, won't speak for my colleagues, is that when Muhammad was in the cave, one of the things that could have happened was that Allah said to him, go now forth and be my spokesperson, and the power of Allah will be with you wherever you go, and go out and tell everybody that I, Allah, stop slavery in all forms from this moment on, the moment that you and I first met. Now, if that was in the Quran in the first, we could all agree that that was a moral act. Whatever happened before, we could all agree that was the case. And I think, as you agree, that didn't happen. There was some encouragement to treat them better. There was some encouragement to let some of them go. But then we've also got these verses here about what your right hand possesses and so forth. So at the same time, he might have been saying that, but at no point did he outlaw it. And in fact, he was encouraged them to do certain things with the, quote, war booty. So I think there's a lot of things going on here. And the question to yourself is, do you see this as a moral example to follow today? Or would you say that that was slightly better at the time and that's where you're going to leave it?
Excuse me. Sorry. I see. We have to look at this hadith along with other hadiths as well. So we know that slavery.
Sure. This is what I'm
slaves
saying.
have rights, right? Also,
no.
Sorry.
No, slaves don't have rights.
Of course, they have rights.
No, this is exactly the point.
Okay, how about we do a search for the rights of slaves in Islam?
No, what we're trying to do at the moment is trying to show that Shamsi is saying in this video that there is only one thing, one view, and that is you should free slaves. And I am saying, no, we should go and show the full bandwidth of what is being shown in Islam regarding slaves.
That's not what I heard him say.
Sorry, but on the other hand, you have all the other instances of doing different things to them.
Yeah, stop. What I heard him say is that the points I got, I think I got 2 or 3 points from him. One was that he disputed James's reasons for discussing slavery and Islam at the park. The other was that he tried to argue the point that the only time Islam accepts slavery is when you conquer somebody in war. You would take their women as part of the booty, and that doesn't go outside how the rest of the world viewed women until very recently, including the UK. The third point I think he tried to mention is that there's many circumstances in which freeing the slaves is encouraged rather than obtaining slaves.
Can I ask you a question?
And the others? That's exactly my point. That's the only thing he's saying. He's only showing one facet, and I'm saying there are 15 which we should all mention at the same time and not just pretend as though it's only one.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Can I just ask then, reactionary, you consistently, repeatedly, like a pattern, compare Allah with the attitude of the kuffar, that is the non-believing world, and its attitudes towards slavery and women. And you're basically, by implication then, your Allah is no different than the kuffar in the treatment of slavery and women. because you're basically saying, well, Allah did it this way, Muhammad did it this way, and we can see today that this is what happens today, this is what happened in the past, this is what Europeans did, so it's okay. So Allah and the kuffar are basically the same in their attitude towards slavery and women. That's what you're saying, yeah?
No.
Well, it is. You keep comparing Allah to the kuffar. You keep comparing Allah to the non-believing world. So it is what you're saying.
I have to.
Yeah.
Of
So
course.
Allah and kuffar.
And which one is better? So, for example, let's say your town gets overtaken by a foreign enemy, and you die, and your wife and daughter remains alive.
Stop using strawman.
How would you like? No, it's not a straw man. It's directly taking your circumstance.
No, but
your
you're
example.
talking hypothetical situations, only get hypothetical answers. So I don't deal with hypotheticals. Allah isn't hypothetical, is he? From your recension, he's real. 1.7 billion human beings on planet Earth believe that this God is real. So Allah and his attitude isn't hypothetical, and we're not dealing with a hypothetical. We're dealing with a 1.7 billion believed reality. So using that as our basis, how can you say, well, you're basically saying, well, Allah did it this way and Muhammad did it this way because the kuffar, the non-believers, are doing it like that ever since anyway. So you can't complain about Allah because you're not complaining about this. But the difference is those commercial activities, those political activities, and those cultural activities that may have treated women as slaves that way are not claiming to be of divine origin, whereas Allah is, Islam is, Muhammad is. So it should have the higher moral ground when dealing with women and slavery. That's the point.
Well, it does.
You're constantly comparing Allah.
It does. Well, it does. Look,
how does it have the? Go ahead, reaction.
Sorry, as I pointed out, how if you look, we talked about slaves as being classed as property, and we said how women, even in the UK, until very recently, were considered property. So the reason I'm saying that is because Thunder is trying to make the point that I'm always comparing Islamic slavery to the non-Muslim world. So I'm using this as a particular example, which he's made. Now,
you're comparing Islamic. You're not comparing Islamic.
Let's look at how women.
No,
women who are considered property.
Let him just finish so we can hear the point, and then we can critique it.
So women in the UK were considered property.
Reaction, you mentioned women in the UK. What is the point of that, mentioning that?
Yes, women in the UK were considered property, but it was Islam that came and gave women rights and said they're not property to be inherited by. It allowed women to choose when they could get married. No. If you look at Hinduism, when a woman's husband dies,
let him finish,
when a woman's husband dies in Hinduism, she is to be burnt along with her dead husband, even though she's alive. Okay. However, so my point is that in Islam, it gave freedom to people. It gave rights to those who were property.
No, it didn't. No, actually, that's not true. No, that's not true.
Lying. For starters, you're comparing Hinduism, which at this moment in time in Saudi Arabia was probably about 3,000 miles away. The nearest religions at the time would have been Judaism, Christianity, and the mainly pagan gods, for instance, Zoroastrianism. You got Roman influences and you got Greek influences. When their wives died, they weren't committing suicide by, is it Hati or Sati or whatever it is they call it over in India? They weren't doing it. So to mention Hinduism,
it still happens today.
It is, yes, it's still. But why are you comparing Allah to all these other religions?
I have to.
No, you don't have to. Allah should not be compared when you're basically saying, when you're trying to justify Allah, you're justifying Allah by saying, well, Allah did it this way, but these people are doing it this way. So actually,
what I'm showing you is find me a better law, a better way of life.
Yeah,
that can apply to all people, all times.
Yeah, but any religion can make that claim. The Hindus are going to turn around and find me a better law than Hinduism.
Well, that's my point. You would then compare it to Islam and see that it's inferior.
Are you okay then? So you're saying that every other religion in comparison to Islam is inferior?
I believe that. Of course, I believe.
Okay, so let's look at slavery then. So when it says in chapter 4, verse 4 or 3, whichever one it is, that you can have sex with all those women that your right hand possesses, you're saying that's a superior moral high ground to have sex slaves that have been captured in war. Now that should go on today because it's a book for all time. It's an eternal book. And you're saying that Allah has taken a high moral ground by saying that in a war situation, when you overtake a land, you can kill off the men and take the women as sex slaves.
Okay, so how were women treated who were captured in war prior to
We're not talking about
Islam?
how women were treated. We're not. That's not the discussion. The discussion.
Of course it is. You have to compare the two. Prior to Islam, how are women captives treated?
Thunderous, hang on a second. His point is that, hey, Islam came along and it's much better because the reason it's much better is because when these men, and let's be charitable and assume that in a scenario, these men were invaders or enemy of Islam, right? Or Muslims in this particular case, when they came and slaughtered the men, they did the morally good thing of, quote unquote, taking these women as slaves rather than leaving them to die. So his position is, hey, this is more moral because they became slaves, which is meant they were taken care of. Otherwise, they would have died. Is that a fair representation, reactionary?
Yeah, I
the
can add to that.
That's not what he
Another
said.
thing is, if a woman is a Muslim, would she be allowed to be taken as a slave, or is it only to?
They weren't Muslims. That's why they went to war. Second of all, you're saying that women couldn't take care of themselves; they had to be taken as slaves.
So had they become Muslim, they would have been freed.
So if it was against their will, then technically what happened to them was rape. They were victimized and raped, taken against their own will to a foreign land that they never knew anything about, after their fathers, brothers, sons, and husbands were all systematically murdered by the Islamic influence.
But that happens today with much graver circumstances in Africa.
Guys, we're talking about things that. But we're not talking about. You are talking about one single instance, and that is female war captives. The Quran does not say anywhere, the Hadiths do not say anywhere, we're only talking about war or female war captives. They're talking in general. If I look at Khadija, for example, did she inherit wealth? Yes. Did she inherit property? Yes. Did she inherit status? Yes. So she had a lot of rights, which Muhammad then diminished. So Islam came and took those rights away from her that she already had. If I look at women in history, if I look at Cleopatra, she did not need Islam to be given any kind of right. So this is not the way that we are looking at things. Either you are saying, okay, the Quran says treat all women like this, or you are saying we're only talking about female captives, war captives, then you need to demonstrate this.
Can I ask a question, actually? Are you just a Muslim by rote? Were you just a Muslim who's basically getting his education from Zakir Naik DVDs and Ahmed Didat DVDs, and you watch the occasional Police TV? But I'm getting the sense you've actually never read the Quran nor the Hadith. So you're defending it from a position of ignorance because you're born a Muslim, and you're in default position of by saying anything you can to try and, but with the greatest respect, and I don't mean to be rude, but it's like you're spraying air freshener on dog shit.
All right, so thank you for the question. All right, so I did try to listen to a Zakir Naik video one day, and to be honest, I couldn't understand most of what he was saying, so I lost patience. The same thing with Ahmed Didat's videos, rahimahullah. And in terms of the Quran, yes, that is a book, that is something I read, and it's something that I've memorized a number of the chapters, the surahs, and so I'm not in Arabic. Yeah.
Do you understand Arabic?
Yeah, to some extent, yeah.
Okay, so if I say Subhanahum wa tabarak ismuka wa ta'ala jaddaka wa la ilaha a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, you can obviously translate that for me, yeah?
How's this relevant, Andres? How's this relevant?
Exactly, yeah.
It's relevant because I'm saying, well, if you've memorized it in Arabic, but he doesn't know what he's read and what he's memorized, what was the point?
Well, I do, because what you just read to me is what is the opening prayer of the whenever you enter the salah, it's called the opening prayer.
Yeah,
you recite it, you read it before the Fatiha, and it's just glorifying Allah and praising Him.
Yeah, but that was the Sorry. The point I'm trying to make is your defense of Islam and the discussion we're having tonight is that we keep repeating the same thing about what the Quran says.
Well, no, we're not actually, because you made a point specifically on female captives. That was your specific target point. Whereas Stops was trying to say, no, that's not our target point. So although I was responding to your point, Stops felt that I was trying to keep the topic on female captives only. No, I was just responding to your focus on the female captives. And Stops has an issue with you keeping it on female captives.
So, okay, so let's just go to what Stops said in reactionary. What's your thought on Stops's point around Khadija, right? Here's a woman who had a great deal of rights, and seemingly after Islam came into effect, that sort of thing never happened, where you had this independent, strong woman who could do all of the things that Khadija did. And in fact, in Islam, you don't see that anywhere, as far as I can tell. So what's your sort of response to that, where there was more rights prior to Muhammad in certain circumstances, not all, in certain, and in fact, that's been diminished?
No, although Khadija's, may Allah be pleased with her, her status was recognized, is famous, we all know about it. But I don't believe that there were no other cases of women like her. I'm sure there were. And we know that when the Muslims migrated to Medina, women in Medina had a lot more, venerance in the eyes of men than the women of Mecca. So the women of Mecca, sadly, were a lot more downtrodden. Men were had more of a sense of superiority over women than the women of Medina. Whereas Medina, they were almost equal to men. I'm
not sure where you're getting the equal to men.
In terms of their treatment, because what happens is in Medina, they had a history of a big Jewish population. So the culture of women in Judaism is they have a lot more dominance over men. And this reflected itself in the bedroom as well. So we have a number of hadith which describe when men were having relations with their wives. I don't want to.
But that seems to suggest to my
pornographic. But what I'm trying to say is that a man may have been used to adopting certain positions with his wife in Mecca, but once they married a woman in Medina, they weren't able to adopt those positions because the women were more in control, and it was considered disrespectful.
Yeah, but that seems to suggest to my ears that it's got nothing to do with Islam. They in fact encountered another culture where, if we're accepting what you're saying, where there was more equality than Islam, and they sort of kind of adopted that. Whereas one would expect, if we're going along with sort of what I understand to be the narrative anyway, that Muhammad came along with a superior moral system. In fact, from what I can hear, you're saying, but no, when they went to Medina, the reason that, again, to use your words, there was more equality is because they encountered other people that had a higher level of equality than they did, and they adopted some of those things. So it had nothing to do with Muhammad or Allah, and possibly, if we go along, if I'm understanding you, with another culture that was already superior to the Muslims when they got to Medina.
Yeah, so partially correct. Well, so what I'm trying to point out is, it wasn't Islam that removed women's rights. Islam is something that it recognizes people's cultures. As long as it fits within the framework of Allah's laws, then you're welcome to keep that culture. What it tries to eliminate is injustice.
Okay, but
okay, but now we're going away from this. This is
what Rob's was trying to say, Ron, was that before Muhammad became a prophet, women had rights. And Khadija is a demonstration of a woman that was allowed to have an education, become prosperous, have a business, and employ men. After Khadija's death, and subsequently the growth of Islam after Khadija's death, we find that Islamic societies did not create women that had education, wealth, and employed men. So you have a pre-Islamic Arabian world and a post-Islamic Arabian world, and the dichotomy that separates the two of them is Islam.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I wouldn't agree with that. That's
maybe next time you come, if you want to join us again, you're more than welcome. Come along next time, and maybe you could present an example of a Muslim woman at the same sort of level as Khadija after Muhammad's death, so that we can see that in fact there were Muslim women that had that sort of thing. Because then at least you could say, hey, here's one or two instances that was within the Islamic paradigm where you had this
Yeah.
woman. At the moment, obviously, I think you're hoping that there is, but you don't know. And we're probably on the side, we very much doubt that anything like that ever happened again. So maybe you can do that next time if you want to.
Fair enough. Okay.
Stops, did you want to say something or finish the video, or where are you at?
No,
'Cause you've
finish the
been
video.
quiet. All right, let's finish that, and then we can continue having a discussion, or we can wrap it up. Let's see how we go. Go for it.
I've never tried to mix that with going around.
Yes, why is it doing that?
People torturing them. So in the war, even the other guy, what's his name? The other guy I spoke to? Pavlov, yeah, Pavlov. Yeah. Even Pavlov agreed with me. He says, yeah, I agree with you. As for the war booties, the war captives, there's different subjects. I disagree with James. So James is not here to seek the truth and learn. Because when I was explaining to him that last time when he approached me about slavery, that we weren't against it, because in Islam, it's something called a raq, which is servitude, which is for the leader, and it occurs if there is a war. Not a group of Muslims go and start fighting people and say this, no. Proper war, with its conditions and everything. So I want to mention that, show these people that liars. There's no verse encouraged to go and take people to serve you. There's no hadith. Rather, what is in the Qur'an, that even those who you take them as a war captives, and they have to, if you want to keep them and serve you, you have to take care of them. And there's many ways to let them go free. Many ways.
Okay, this goes back to the old point. Why not say don't do it instead of regulating it, instead of saying, well, once you have taken them, you need to look after them, you need to clothe them, you need to feed them, you need to treat them in this and this and this way. And you, by the way, you're also allowed to have sex with them, even if they're married and things like that. Why not just say, listen, you're not allowed to. Just go and don't do it. Instead of telling them these are the ways and don't use this position or whatever, don't hit them in the face. Just stop beating them. That's it, finished.
But he also said that James brought forward that there was slavery, and it was to some degree encouraged. And here we see it again, right? So the claim that there isn't any slavery in Islam, and we're not denying, and Reactionaries made that point, right? We're not denying that there was at certain points some verses about encouraging freeing slaves, but there's also verses that talk about how you treat them, and whether you can marry them or purchase them. As we say again, here's the tafsir from 424. Allah said, you're allowed to use your money to marry up to 4 wives, or for the purchase of as many female slaves as you like, which is Allah's statement, and to enjoy them sexually, right? That's the tafsir from Quran 424. So this is not true. And the other thing that certainly frustrates me a little bit with these apologists now in Speaker's Corner is this claim that when people like James or whoever, I haven't been there for a long time, but probably I would be lumped in as well, go down there with what I think are valid critiques, they're bringing the sources, right? Shamsi and other, and especially people like Adnan Rashid, their favorite response is these Islamophobes, these Islam haters, right? This is an intellectually dishonest tactic. I know Reactionary wouldn't do that. I hope he condemns that, because if an atheist was doing that, I would condemn that. This is intellectually dishonest, right? You're bringing the critiques down there. It's not like James is coming down there and shouting pedophile and this, that, and the other thing. He's bringing critiques from the sources, and he's wanting genuine responses. And Shamsi's claim is he's coming down there to make Islam look bad. And what he's really doing is challenging James's character. And at no point has he demonstrated in any way that James is being dishonest or that he has untrustworthy or disingenuous character. And this sort of dishonesty, certainly disingenuousness by Shamsi is something that doesn't go unnoticed by me. And I'm going to call this out every single time. There's my...
That's because you find on the side of the argument that goes against Islam, that the person arguing against Islam comes with the knowledge, comes with the historical reference points, and comes with probably more knowledge of what the Quran and Hadith teach anyway. And when the Muslim who can only use a lie to defend a lie has run out of lies to use, then what ad hominem is the last resort, which is what happens with people like James and like Jay Smith and such. You know, in his comment about Jay Smith, it's attacking Jay Smith. It's attacking Jay Smith's argument, because he's trying to create a prejudice in the minds of those who are listening, more so for the Muslim, because he doesn't want the Muslim to listen into this, but also those who are listening to the argument that might be sitting from a position of indifference to either side of the argument.
And I also want to make clear, right, this doesn't apply to all Muslims. Reactionary's on the panel with us. He's not the sort of person that I've ever heard say this, right? But I'm pointing specifically to Shamsi because he's just said these things, right? And to people like Adnan because they've said it. So again, I want to make clear this is not all Muslims, and we have a Muslim on the panel, and I've not heard him say it. If he were, I would say that. I don't think so. So I want to be clear who I'm critiquing, and it's not all Muslims.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why do you think Shamsi is using the word or using that definition towards James?
I think because he's intimidated by somebody who understands and who has read some of Islam. He's not an expert, but he's read the sources. He's actually bringing sources, and Shamsi doesn't have a substantive response. And so part of, I think, the tactics now for certain Muslims reactionary down there is to paint their interlocutors as disingenuous or dishonest or hate preachers or Islamophobes. Now, he hasn't used those words, but this is a tactic now to try and sidestep these people or to show that they are not worthy interlocutors. And if you've watched James, I hope you have, I don't think you can ever say that James has been as being dishonest anyway. You can disagree with him all you want, but if you can point out where he's been disingenuous and dishonest, I will publicly agree with you. If you haven't, and I don't think you can, then I think the critique of Shamsi is valid.
I like James's personality. The way he speaks is very polite, and he comes prepared with his material. So if somebody is prepared to sit down and go through his material with him together, and I see no problem with that. I can understand Shamsi having the view that James is an Islamophobe, if you want to use that word, because.
Well, he hasn't said that, so I won't put words into his mouth.
No, let's not use that word. What's the word he used? I don't know. Anti-Islam? I don't know.
James comes down to make Islam look bad was what he said earlier in the video. I don't know what he said now specifically.
Okay.
The exact
so
words.
Trying to make Islam look bad. So I can understand Shamsi viewing him in that way, because if he's at the park, he's a Muslim. He sees James coming to him and to other Muslims with these challenges. But the only religion he sees him targeting is Islam. So he is trying to make Islam look bad. He's not targeting Judaism, who probably believe the same thing, or with less reasoned arguments. So, but he doesn't target Christianity or Judaism or any other religion. The only one he sees him targeting is Islam. So he has reason to believe that.
Okay, but when you say
it's not making it look bad.
You know, he's trying to.
No, I don't think so. Yeah. I think what he's doing, is doing the same thing as I'm doing. I'm not trying to make Islam look bad. What I'm trying to do is show the inconsistencies, trying to show the contradictions, showing the mistakes, so that people think about that. And that's exactly what he's doing.
Mm. Okay, and I think, okay, go ahead, Rob. Sorry.
No, you finish. My apologies. Go on.
That's all right. Okay. If let's say he discusses something with Muhammad Hijab, and Muhammad Hijab gives him clear answers to the questions he had and clears out certain misconceptions, how should James respond?
Well, if in fact Muhammad Hijab, and I will dispute that Muhammad Hijab has ever cleared up confusions, but if he were the case and he'd given a solid rebuttal, then James, if he was intellectually honest, would say, hey, I've got my answer and I'm rebutted sufficiently or refuted.
You wouldn't expect him to come back a week later with the same argument to somebody else.
But reactionary, we're assuming that Hijab has done that. Can you provide us with some evidence that he's done that? And if in fact that's the case, we can publicly say that here on the show. So
okay. I was giving an example. I'm not sure.
I don't think he's ever done that.
Footage. Okay.
Muhammad Hijab, in my experience, hasn't refuted almost anything that anybody has brought that's a substantial critique. So your view that he's done this, I would want the evidence for.
Yeah,
and we can have a look, right? At the moment, I'm utterly unconvinced. I've spoken to him myself. I've watched many of his videos. I'm unconvinced that he's done that, right? Okay. You and I can disagree, but if you have the please bring it along and we can have a look. And we'll do it live on the show. I can see if that in fact is the case.
One thing I want to make very clear at the moment, while we're on the topic, if I'm comparing Shamsi, Hijab, and Rashid and all these other idiots, reactionary, I'm very sorry. You are like in a different league. Okay, you are somebody who is articulate. You are somebody who thinks before saying something. You can bring forward an argument. With you, it's, you know, we're able to talk. With a hijab or with a Shamsi, we can't do that. There's no point, because they will just go and bring their dogmatic script that they have developed, and they will go in one direction only. Because this is what I did with you just now, where I said, I challenge you. I said, okay, can you go beyond that? Can you have different things? And you agreed. You said, yes, it's possible. Maybe it's not the correct one. Maybe it's uncomfortable for you, but you are capable of doing that. And that is just something I want to point out.
Yeah, I'd like to say I don't think it's nice to call them idiots. I can understand them. Look, right now I'm sitting in the comfort of my warm, a warm room in my house, so I'm comfortable. These guys are at the park in the rain, in the snow, constantly being badgered by all sorts of different people. So they're going to be in a different predicament. They may not have the same sense of calm to respond reasonably to all the questions that they get faced with.
Yeah, but remember as well, reactionary, they are going down there claiming Islam is the best ideology and trying to refute everybody else, right? This isn't like somebody came and found these guys and knocked on their door and said, oi, you Muslim, get out here. You better defend Islam, right? Like somebody comes and knocks on your door, I would be in your defense, right? Who dares do that? These guys are going out into the public and making massive claims, right? And then people like myself, Stops Thunderous, James, and others are going, hang on a moment, let's see whether these claims in any way stack up, right? So I think you are giving them a little bit too much leeway here. It's like somebody going, it was like somebody else I heard recently said, oh, I make this argument in defense of my religion and I've got to know all these things. It's like, well, you're not going to get sympathy from me if you're going out there preaching the word and then suddenly going, hang on a moment, but you know, I'm getting all this pushback. Well, you were the person who went out there and did that, right? So I'm going to be less sympathetic to people going down to Speaker's Corner. And the same for me. I wouldn't go down there and claim, well, do you know what? All these Muslims come around me, they surround me, they're all at me or whatever. I put myself in that position. It's my responsibility. If I don't like it, I go away, right?
It is hard though, you have to admit. I've seen
but if you look at it, but if you look at it, it's sometimes at least, if not more than sometimes, I'm being charitable, I suggest, much harder for non-Muslims, because there's at least 70-80% Muslim down in Speaker's Corner. As you know, you visit there regularly. Oftentimes they surround the interlocutor, be it a Christian or an atheist or a non-Muslim, let's just say as a blanket term, right? And you have and you've got they're being, as the term we call it, dogpiled, right? You're getting questions coming in from all over the show. So there's a lot for non-Muslims as well. And so I think the Muslims have definitely got the comfort and the numbers on their side down in Speaker's Corner compared to everybody else combined, right?
That's true.
So,
that's true.
Yeah, I'm going to be less sympathetic to them. You at home, that's a different story. But at least you're coming out here, right? So I think that's admirable, right? Yeah.
One of the paths that lead you to paradise, to freedom. So don't you ever, Islamic haters, try to compare the European slaveries to what is in Islam we call Iraq. It's not the same at all. Rather, the Prophet Muhammad from day one, he warned against that specific European slavery. I'm not saying there's only European, there's no one enslaved, no one except Europeans. But before this, what the European invented, everybody was enslaved with everybody. But I'm talking about the specific European ones. Because that's the one they say, look, we abolished it. They're proud of it, we abolished it. And why you Prophet Muhammad never started it. Rather, he warned against it. So this issue, it was very, alhamdulillah, one of our teachers wrote about it. It's a deep issue. I have mentioned that to him. But why I see these guys coming, try to say Islam is slavery and try to cause confusion. So this term, as I mentioned, I don't really like to use it. That's why last time you told me, I said, no, I don't believe that. Because I know any person, when he hears the word slavery, straight away, your mind is going to picture the European one. So that is a clear, alhamdulillah, Islam came, Prophet came to take people out from, to be slaves of people, to be the servant of the Creator, and to worship the Creator. And as I've mentioned, Islam teaches us that human beings are born originally to be free. However, that occurs, servitude occurs in a war, legislative war. Not a group of people going to another country, killing people and taking them as our slaves. That in Islam is forbidden. I hope that is clear for everyone. And again, I clarified it, and I'll clarify again. We're not blaming not the British government of our time or any government of something that happened centuries back. The reason I was mentioning European slavery because James tried to say what Prophet Muhammad did was the same. So to clarify, that he's a liar against Prophet Muhammad, and he's Hatib Ulayl, person who just go during the night when it's dark and he collects everything. There's no way he's collecting. And he told me he goes to Google and starts asking questions. And then learn about Islam based upon Google. That is a clear. Barakallahu feekum.
Okay, so obviously again there's the attack on James, and obviously as we've shown, there are similarities. Are there differences with the Atlantic slave trade? Yes, you can argue there's differences, but there are similarities as well. And for Shamsi to try and wipe that under the rug as if these two things are not the same, and then try to look for the best quote unquote version of slavery and not deal with the worst part of it, again, is not being intellectually honest. And unfortunately, Muslims, not like a reactionary, but the gullible and ignorant ones, will take Shamsi at his word and go and repeat what he says without looking at any hadiths or Quran or anything else, and then keep repeating that. And he's only giving, as Stops quite rightly pointed out, a part view of it. He's not being intellectually honest and saying, hey, there's this whole thing. And then he's got the cheek to point out what James is doing, which is James is showing the other side, and he's claiming it's not the case. No. This is not intellectually honest. But now somebody like Shamsi will never come on the show, right? If he came on the show here, I think we'd take him to task quite seriously, and he wouldn't be able to make these sort of sweeping statements without being challenged quite strongly. But of course, we don't get any. Luckily, we get reactionary on here, but we won't get any of these quote unquote regulars in Speaker's Corner on here. They won't come on, right? Although they're starting to do live streams now. So reactionary, these guys, where we are every Friday. Bring these guys on. Mansour, I've seen now on live stream, and these other guys. We're waiting for these guys to come here where we can have this conversation. We can look up the text, and then they can't make spurious claims that they think they can get away with in Speaker's Corner. You and I know how it works there. Here's a different story.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to say, he didn't really add anything to the to the subject matter. He just summarized, I guess, from that point on. I just remembered. Did you see the debate between Hijab and Edward Tabash?
I've only seen the first part. I didn't see the second part.
Okay. Yeah, I don't want to go off topic, but maybe next week. I don't know if you want to.
Well, we're going to go to an after show after those for those who are interested. Have you got access to Discord, or have you got you've got a browser presumably? A lot of people are moving their direction because Hangouts is obviously going to be retired early next year, and we're building, and maybe you've got one already, but we're building a channel. We have got a channel on Discord. So what we'll do is we'll finish up here in the live stream. But the beauty of Discord is that you can have up to like 100 people in a discussion all at the same time. We're limited to 10. Obviously, we'll moderate that sort of thing if necessary so people get to speak. But we can go to an after show. And I'm very happy to chat to you about that. As I say, I've only seen the first part. I need to see the part 2 because that we didn't get to their cross-questioning and so forth. But I don't want to digress from that in the main show. But very happy if you want to join us on the after show on Discord, where ourselves and some of the viewers that are watching will come on and we can continue that. Because I'd be interested in your thoughts on that if you got the time and you want to do that.
Yeah, that would be nice. Yeah, thanks.
Well, I think with that stops unless you or Thunderous have got anything else. The show went on a lot longer.
Reaction, you don't keep slaves, right?
Not with me here, no.
Okay, why not? Why not?
Tell me where I can get some. I'm joking. No, I don't.
Plenty of places in Africa. But okay, from a moral point of view, why is it that you don't?
Well, I have not gone to war and captured any. There's none. It's not like, I don't know. It's not something that I'm familiar with culturally. It's not something that I know to exist. Even morally, I mean, if something exists in your way of life, right? Even if you don't agree with it morally, you can visualize it because it's around you. Okay, but slavery doesn't exist around us. Not that we can recognize anyway. Although there is human trafficking, there is slavery actually. There are police reports on slavery in the UK. and not just what we might think of African slaves. We're talking about European slaves.
I'm actually a slave.
Yeah,
I'm actually a twofold slave. I'm a slave to the system, and in the words of Grace, in the words of Grace Jones, I'm a slave to the rhythm.
Oh, God. Okay, no, that's it. I just wanted to ask. I just wanted to make this point because I think it's substantial.
Let's put it like this. It's a good question, Stops. But I want to quickly jump. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but imagine if tomorrow in the UK slavery was, with the UK leaves the EU, okay, and all of a sudden we get a new king, the Queen. Her Majesty passes away, may God preserve her. But all of a sudden we have a new king, and he says, I'm taking over Parliament. I'm not allowing any new rules to come into play. And I authorize slavery. And we get slave markets set up. Now, would you be able to find yourself going down to the slave market and buying a slave?
No, and I'd fight against any ruler that would bring in such a thing, right? I think there would be an uprising, and I'd be part of that to prevent any such institution being brought about, right? Because I could be the next slave, you could be the next slave, and there's no ways that we're going to have that in the 21st century. So if your example came to, where you had this, I think most of the UK population, or I won't say most, at least some, and I would be part of that, would do whatever's necessary, including taking up physical arms to prevent such an immoral institution from being brought about.
So would you go to prison for that cause?
I'd go to prison for fighting against something like that I think would take the UK back centuries, if not, back to the Iron Age. So yes, I think there are certain things that are worth fighting for and preserving, and allowing slavery back into the 21st century, I think, is one of those things that even if we needed to use physical violence to stop, I think that would be justified. I don't know about yourself, but that's my view.
Yeah, but now you need to ask the same question. Why? Why not? Why would you do that? It's because you are better. Your morality is better than that of this king who allows slavery, because your moral values are much better than that of the king. And the same is true for Islam, where Muslims are better than their God. The morality of a Muslim is of a much higher value than that of the God who is being depicted in the Quran. That's the reality.
How can you help slaves whilst in prison? How could you help your cause?
No, well, I'm going to help before I go there. I'm going to do everything I can. Obviously, I'd want to avoid prison, right? And so the movement would be to prevent that from happening. And if as a consequence one went to prison, then I would go, okay, I've done something to the best of my ability to prevent this sort of institution from coming into, because I could be, my family, my wife, you, Stops, or anybody else could be, if we're not part of, the king's inner circle, right? So that's how once I'm there, obviously there's not a lot I can do, but I can do as much as I can prior to getting there, right?
Yeah, fair enough.
Cool. Let's.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. I enjoyed it.
You're very welcome. Stops, have you got a hadith of the day? I was just looking for one here quickly.
Shit, I'm sleeping.
That's fine. I've got one actually. I don't know if you can. Maybe I can.
So I don't need to look.
Hang on a second. Well, since we've been on the topic of slavery, I'm going to bring up one from that, and then we'll go to an after show on Discord. As I say, Reaction, please, we'd love to have you on. If you've not been on, I can explain to you how to do that sort of stuff in what's the name, and then we'll post the link as well. I'm sure TDS Dave will do that for us again. So here's the hadith of the day.
Is that an invite, or is TDS? Is that an invite, or what, or just the?
That's an invite directly to our Discord server. You click on that. Whether you're in a browser, you can also download the app. You can use your phone. It'll bring up an app, or it'll ask you to download the app. And once you've set that up, it takes 5 minutes. You're then in, and you can join other Discord servers. And so there's a lot of discussions there. So we'll just finally bring up this hadith of the day here. So this is a Sahih Muslim. Then there's your references. Depending on how you look at the references, it's all at the bottom there. Imran B. Hussain reported that a person who had no other property emancipated 6 slaves of his at the time of his death. Allah's messenger called for them and divided them into 3 sections, cast lots among them, and set 2 free, and kept 4 in slavery. And he, the Holy Prophet, spoke severely of him.
That's the one I was talking about earlier. Excellent. Well done.
Okay, I didn't know that was the one you were referring to. So
This is exactly what I said. When he took them and he split them up, and 2 he kept and 3 he took, and da da da.
okay, well, so somehow we must be telepathically linked.
Must be. This the quantum time.
So on that note, I definitely want to thank Reaction. We open invite to come back again. As always, thank you, Stops and Thunderous. Thank you to all of you who are viewing. We've got 60 at the moment.
Rob, emergency. No, Takia, this is not censorship. That he is out and he closed his channel. This has nothing to do with censorship. This just to nip this in the bud. He decided to abdicate, or he decided to throw in the towel to focus his efforts elsewhere for the time being. That's it. So it's not censorship. He was not chucked out. And Takia, the Discord server is still up and running, so people can still go and chat there. But he closed his YouTube channel, and he is not going to participate in any more discussions, neither looking at Islam nor defending Christianity.
And on that note, again, thank you very much to Reactionary, an open invitation to return. Thank you to Stops and Thunderous. Thank you to all of you guys. We'll be back again next Friday, 8 p.m. TDS Dave, if you can just put the Discord server link in once more, we'll be going straight there now. We can continue this discussion and have other discussions. Hopefully Reactionary will join us. If you're a Muslim, please join us there as well. We welcome everybody to come in. And on that note, I bid you good night.
Cheers.
Good night.